All right, we're starting.
Hello and welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us today. It's great to see some familiar names in our participants side of things here on Zoom. Thanks for joining us. Well, we've got lots of folks trickling in, so good morning to everyone. All right, so I think most of our attendees are here. That number is kind of coming to slow down. Well, welcome everyone and good morning. I'm Marian Shetty. I am the Director of Charter School Authorizing here at TEA. And you are here for our first mandatory info session on the Generation 28 Open Enrollment Charter School application. We're excited to have you here today. Hopefully this session gives you lots of great information, gives you multiple opportunities to ask and get your questions answered. And then you'll leave here today or next week ready to move forward with your application and start drafting and working on it and preparing for your submission in November. So let's go ahead and get us started today. We're going to kick off with some introductions. As I said, I'm Marian Shetty. I'm the Director of Charter School Authorizing here at the Texas Education Agency and have the great joy and benefit of working with our New Schools team. On our New Schools team, we have John Garland and Natalie Elliott. And these, Natalie and John, are really going to be your points of contact through the application process. And so you'll know them, you'll love them by the end of November. But they really are your go-tos through this whole process. They've got lots of great information and are going to be giving a wonderful kind of info session on the application here today. So let's keep going through our content today. So our agenda, we wouldn't be good educators if we didn't kind of outline what was going to happen for you for today. So we've started today with welcome and introductions. I'm going to give a brief portfolio overview here in a second of what charter schools look like here in Texas. We'll have a short break. Natalie and John will do that application overview. We'll have time for Q&A after that. We've got some folks from our school finance team that are going to come in and give a presentation on the financial plan workbook. There'll be Q&A period after that. We'll have a break for lunch, and then we'll move into the afternoon's content. So in the afternoon, I'll come back and give a presentation about the Charter School Program grant that we have here at the Texas Education Agency. There'll be a period for Q&A. We'll take a short break. We have folks from our special populations team that are going to come and give a presentation about special education, another time for Q&A right after that. And then folks from our instructional materials and supports team here at the agency are going to come and give a presentation about high quality instructional materials. And then we'll close it out. We'll have some information to share about other opportunities for support through the process. And then there'll be kind of optional Q&A at the end. Maybe you missed something, maybe you had another question that didn't get answered. So lots of time for Q&A built in after each of the sections, as well as some time at the end today too. So I'm going to kind of dive right into our portfolio overview here. We may not take the full time this morning. That's okay. We'll allot that to our info session about the application a little later. So the role of our authorizing office here at TEA is to expand the Texas Charter School portfolio by approving high quality applicants to launch high quality schools. And so you'll see this phrase high quality a lot in our conversations and in our application. And really what we're trying to do with the application process is assess whether or not the school or schools that you're proposing are going to be high quality for students and meet their needs. Here also in the authorizing office, we provide leadership guidance and support to all of our state authorized charter schools, as well as we provide support to districts and ISDs here in Texas who are interested in having district authorized charter schools. So we do this both with our state authorized schools as well as with our traditional school districts as well too. Our office is also responsible for renewing, approving expansion or replication, non-renewals or revocations So really anything you think of from birth to sometimes the end of charter schools, that's what our authorizing office here at TEA does as well. And then we also monitor the legal requirements and performance of the schools according to the charter contract, accountability measures that we have here that all Texas public schools have, and the charter school performance framework as well too. So what is the purpose of Texas charter schools? And so the Texas Education Code outlines kind of these 5 purposes of charter schools in the Education Code. First and foremost, improve student learning, increase choice opportunities in the public school system, create professional opportunities to attract new teachers, establish a new form of accountability, and then lastly, encourage different and innovative learning methods. And so you'll see this kind of peppered through the application in a number of different ways as well too. So let's talk a little bit about the history of Texas charter schools. And so in the 74th legislature, the Texas charter law was passed, which established a cap of 120 schools, and that was in 1995. And then in 1996, the State Board of Education awarded the first open enrollment charter schools in the state of Texas. We still have a number of those schools in operation today. And then in 1997, those schools first started serving students in the state of Texas. So we are, well into a number of years that charter schools have been around in Texas and serving students. In 2001, university and four-year colleges could establish charter schools. And then in 2009, junior colleges were added into that university authorization to allow them to establish charter schools as well if they were interested. In 2013, probably the biggest overhaul, Senate Bill 2 was passed during the 83rd legislative session, and that conveyed the authorizing authority from the State Board of Education to the Commissioner of Education, with the State Board of Education having a veto authority. And then it also kind of established some accountability laws for charter schools as well, creating our mandatory default closure laws if there is a period of non-performance for a number of years. And it expanded the cap to 305, which is where we are today, or that is where the cap is today. So I talked about Texas Education Code. And so anyone who is interested in opening a charter school, there's 2 things that I would recommend you read through before you even start on the application. First is Chapter 12 of the Texas Education Code, and specifically Subchapter D or Subchapter E. And these are the laws that charter schools in the state of Texas that are open enrollment charter schools must follow. And so I really recommend reading those first and foremost before you start on your application. It's really important to know what are the laws that you have to follow if you are going to open a charter school. And then the second thing is rule or policy or administrative code that kind of is the next step down of everything else that charter schools in Texas have to follow. And so Texas Administrative Code, Chapter 100, has all of that good information about what are the policies and rules that charter schools have to follow. Here you'll find information about the expansion process and the amendment process, and then things and expectations that our office has and how we operationalize some processes are also in these rules. So first and foremost, before you start working on those applications, definitely recommend you reading the law and then the rule. Those are the 2 kind of sets of guidelines that we follow for charter schools here in the state of Texas. So let's talk about who is attending and how many schools that we have here in Texas. So we have 185 charter LEAs that have 872 campuses. And in the past school year, they served 377,375 students, which is 7% of Texas public school students. So 7% of Texas public school students choose to attend charter schools and our open enrollment charter schools. There's a little bit more that choose to attend district authorized charter schools as well. And in terms of our operators, the majority of our operators manage fewer than 6 campuses. And so we often know kind of the large organizations that you kind of hear about frequently, but that is really the small percentage of our schools here in Texas. So we have 12 large operators that operate 10 or more campuses, 14 medium-sized operators that operate 6 to 9 campuses, and then 78 small operators operating 2 to 5 campuses. And then we have 81 what we call our standalone operators, and they operate a single campus. And so you'll see that the numbers there, the vast majority of our charter schools manage fewer than 6 campuses in their portfolio. And so this is something that we're really looking forward to updating here in August once the new accountability scores come out. Since because of COVID, 2019 is the last year that we have official ratings. So prior to the pandemic, the performance of the charter school sector was continuing to improve. So you'll see here kind of a decrease in DNF rated districts, an increase in A and B as well. And so ultimately over time, that's what we're looking for. And so I think the connection to our application and accountability and performance is that we want our charter schools to start as A or B rated schools. That's really important to us. We want those students to have high quality opportunities and have high quality expectations from our schools from day one. And so we're looking for everyone to start in those 2 green bars that you see here on the graph. And our application is really designed to make sure that applicants are thinking through all of the components in order to achieve that and to achieve that high bar as well. So from our demographics perspective, so our charter schools, we see them serve higher percentages of minority students in traditional districts here. And you'll see this kind of across the board in a number both for African-American students as well as Hispanic and Latinx students than our traditional ISD schools. And we see that our charter schools also serve higher percentages of economically disadvantaged students in our traditional districts. So almost 10%, they serve almost 10% more economically disadvantaged students, 10% more English ESL students, about 8% more English language learners, and then slightly like about 3% less of fewer special education students. So we're seeing kind of a higher percentage of those students in our charter schools than our traditional districts. And then one interesting fact is that our charter schools also employ a higher percentage of minority teachers than traditional districts. But you will see here that our charter school teachers typically have, there's a higher percentage of those who have fewer than 5 years of experience. And we're almost on par with traditional ISDs when it comes to percentage of teachers with advanced degrees. So we at TEA really have a rigorous application process. And so we see this as really important because for charter schools to have that increased autonomy that they have increased accountability, right? And so that comes with the start of the application process. We consider our kickoff here today the start of the Generation 28 process. And really the start of our relationship with applicant groups as well too. And so I'm going to walk through each of these, and it's interesting because you can kind of think of the application process as somewhat of a funnel. So we kind of start with all applications kind of being in, and then we do a number of reviews through the process that gets us to our end result of approved charters. So our first process there in the red, and Natalie and John are going to go into these much more in detail and much more and how you'll want to pay attention to these processes and as well. But our first kind of funnel there in the red is our applications are reviewed against a minimum standard. So we take every application that gets submitted and we review it to make sure, 1, that the entity is eligible, 2, that it is complete, and 3, that the application is not plagiarized, right? And so there's lots of good detail in the application directions around plagiarism, but That's kind of our minimum standard that we review. We're not really assessing the content of the application at that point, but we're really just trying to make sure, is the entity eligible? Is the application complete? And is the application of their own original writing and doing? So then once folks kind of make it through that stage, then we go to our external panel review. So all of the applications are reviewed by a panel of external experts in charter school authorizing. And you have to have a minimum score of 85% of the available review points in order to advance. We'll get into a little bit of the details of how you get to that 85 later on. But we're really looking for that minimum threshold to even be able to move forward in the process. And then once we have our folks who have made it through the external review, we do interagency TEA staff review on the remaining applications prior to the capacity interviews. So we have kind of a robust team of representing different offices across the agency, from our special populations to our legal team, to our finance team, to our instructional materials team, who all review every application that makes it past the external review. And so we have a robust kind of cross-functional set of individuals who are taking a look at our applications and making sure that they're going to meet the bar for our expectations kind of in these different areas across the agency as well. So once that happens, we then conduct capacity interviews of these applicant groups. And so we often have SBOE or excuse me, our State Board of Education members who participate in that process. And this is really the time for us to ask questions to make sure that the applicants know and understand what has been written in the application. It's a way for us to follow up on any areas that we have questions about, and for the applicant to demonstrate really their capacity. Do they have the capacity to run and launch a brand new charter school? And then once we have those capacity interviews, the commissioner then evaluates recommendations and makes recommendations on which of those charter schools to approve. He shares those recommendations with the State Board of Education members. And then we get into the green part of the funnel. So the State Board of Education takes action, which is either a veto or no action, which ultimately results to approval within 90 days of the commissioner notifying of the recommendations. And then if a applicant receives no action by the State Board of Education, then we move into our contingencies phase. And so we evaluate every application to make sure that it is meeting all of the legal requirements that charter schools have to meet. Any contingencies or modifications to applications have to be made before we will then issue a contract to a charter school. And then charter schools are awarded contracts to operate and then begin kind of their pre-opening year. That year in the and our next process will be the year of 23-24 before they then open up the following year. So as you can see, there are a number of steps, and the process in some ways serves as a funnel to get us to the highest quality applications. And so through that process, since 2013, just 13.8% of charter applicants have been approved. And so over the past years, we've had a number of applications come in, and we've had 37 approved charter schools. And so we have a really rigorous process. So we nationally, the 20 largest authorizers in the US approve approximately 39% of their new charter applications, and we're coming in well under that. So we have a really high bar for our expectations for our applicants here in Texas, and a high bar through our process as well too. So we're a little ahead of schedule here. I'm going to go over a couple of housekeeping things. We've set up a Q&A function for the sessions today. So if you have questions that come up, please use the Q&A that will come up. We had a question of, will we be getting these slides as notes? And so a recording of the session and all of the decks will be posted on the applicant's website after next week's session. We are taking notes of attendance today since it is required for the Generation 28 application process. So as we had registration, we have an attendance report from Zoom, and that's what we use to confirm attendance. And then when there's a question around how not able to open the application. So this often comes up. We will discuss in depth today, and John is going to show you how to do that, how to download it and save it so that everyone has access to it. The way that you access it is through the website, and we'll show you exactly how that works. If any other questions come up as we're presenting today, make sure that you will use the Q&A function, and then we will answer those questions. You can also review what's already been answered and asked and answered before you maybe submit your next question as well too. And on that note, we'll take a quick 5-minute break. So we'll come back it's 9:21 now. We'll adjust the slide on the screen to have the correct time. So we'll take a quick 5-minute break, stretch your legs, get some water, get prepared for our intro sessions, and we'll come back at 9:26. We'll see you all soon.
All right, everybody, it's 9:26. We're going to give everybody about 30 more seconds to get back to the computer, and then we'll start. All right, everybody, welcome back. That was a short break. Okay, just as a reminder before we get started, Marion mentioned use the Q&A function. Just want to elaborate a little bit on that in terms of what we can answer today and what we can't, right? So you are more than welcome to ask whatever you want. But in terms of what we can answer, we can't give you any sort of advice about your application. So again, you're more than welcome to ask it. But we just want to be very transparent that we cannot give anyone any competitive advice or advantage to this process. So we would like to spend today in terms of Q&A answering general questions that you might have about our process or any specific things about the application. So if we can keep it in that sandbox, that'd be great. But again, you can ask whatever you'd like. All right, let's get going, everybody. Hopefully everyone's at their computer. All right. So we have a lot to cover in a little amount of time. So for the next 45 minutes, Natalie and myself are going to be discussing our application process and the application itself. And one big thing is how to actually view the application, as someone asked earlier. So we're going to talk to you first about how to actually access the application through our website. I'll pilot a preview of that shortly. We're going to talk about who can apply, what are those available applications to those entities. We're going to talk about the parts of the application package, and then we're going to take a deep dive into the narrative document itself, the attachments. We're going to highlight some terms and concepts that are beneficial to you all at this point in the application process. Natalie will also talk to you about how to assemble and submit the application, how the applications are scored and reviewed, and then last, we will leave you with some key takeaways and some important reminders. All right, so how do you actually access the application and its contents? So I'm going to go ahead and show you all a quick preview of our webpage. All right, so I'm sharing a screen with you. You should be able to see the main charter school webpage. Even if you aren't applying or choose to apply this cycle, our charter school webpage is a good source of just general charter school information, ranging from application, inception, launch, to just how charter schools are run. But for today, let's go ahead and scroll down, and I hope to not make you all too dizzy. We're going to focus our attention today on the applicants button. All right, so our charter school applicant page has two application pathways for you. Either you will go through the sub D or the subchapter E, as we will discuss a little bit on the next slide. And then we have about 5 buttons below that we'll get into here in a second, but let's go ahead and click that subchapter D button. All right. So as you can see, the application is going to be due for everyone on November 4th, 2022. All right, so if you're a subchapter D applicant, everything that you're going to need is going to be here across these 4 buttons, right? So the first button is the application timeline. This is just a 1-page PDF calendar of all the major dates. It's like a refrigerator or put it on your wall reference sheet. The application documents button, we'll go ahead and click that. All right, so here you're going to find the instructions and guidance document, as Marion mentioned earlier, and the application narrative, and we'll discuss that here in a little bit. The mandatory information sessions button. I don't really need to click on this because you all are here today. And then last, I'm gonna focus on the additional supports button. Natalie's gonna talk to you a bit more about the optional support seminars and what they actually are. But for our purposes today and right now, I just want to show you all these buttons are your access points to register. So if you want to register for our August 10th one on governance and community engagement, you would just click this button and it will take you to the Zoom registration. That's all you need to do. And again, just want to reiterate, they are optional. And then below we have our optional office hours for Q&A and the calendar dates. You don't need to register for these. However, these links will take you to the actual Zoom meeting. All right, so what are these 5 buttons down here do? So Marion's going to talk to you a bit later today, this afternoon, about the CSP grant. That's a Charter School Performance Startup Grant. Just as a basic starting point, this is a good opportunity and resource for you. This will click you to good resources about the grant itself. The public meeting calendar, we're going to talk a little bit more about what the public meeting is and why that should matter to you all. But for right now, just know that when you give us notice of your public meeting, we actually post that notice on our website here for the public to see, again, just as a way to get the word out for everyone. The opportunity zone locator. So in our application, there is an opportunity to gain 2 or earn 2 priority points if you propose to open in a qualified opportunity zone. This will link you to a map that will enable you and hopefully help you find whether or not where you want to open is located in an opportunity zone. Charter school governance, this is going to be a good jump off spot if you want to learn about board requirements like board training and things of that nature. And then lastly, and probably most important to you all through this process, is going to be the FAQ document. So every year, after both our application information sessions, we're going to take all the questions, even the ones we answer, and we're going to put those in one big collective document that is also kind of, I guess, compiles all other years of questions as well that are still relevant. And we compile that into one FAQ document. So if you click this link now, it's going to take you to last year's application FAQ document. Those questions by and by are probably still relevant, but you probably want to hold off for a couple more weeks until we post the Gen 28 FAQ document. We will send you an email because we have your email by virtue of your registration to let you know when that FAQ document will actually be available on our website and for your review. Okay, so that's our website. That's how you're going to access all the documents you need. And just as a reminder, you can contact us if you have problems accessing any of these documents, and we will be glad to troubleshoot with you to get that remedied. All right, so let's get back to our presentation. Okay. All right, let's talk about eligible entities who can apply. So the Texas Education Code carves out 2 big statutory pathways for our purposes today. The first one is subchapter D and chapter 12 of the Texas Education Code, and subchapter E in the same chapter 12. Subchapter D is 99.99% of our kind of ongoing applicant pool. So within subchapter D, there are 4 types of eligible entities. The first one is going to be the tax exempt organization. So if you have your 501c3 tax exempt status from the IRS, you'd be an eligible entity. If you're a governmental entity, you can apply for subchapter D. If you're an institute of higher learning or a private college or university, you can also apply under subchapter D. as so long as you qualify as either of those entities in TEC Chapter 61. But I want to go back to the tax exempt organization for a second. And if you're taking notes, probably want to circle this one quite a bit. You do not have to have your final status, your final tax exempt status by November 4th, by the application submission deadline. What you will need to have, and I'll repeat, what you will need to have is your proof that you have filed with the IRS for tax exempt status. Oh, apologies. But on that note, we strongly encourage everyone who plans to apply for 28 that if you do not have that tax exempt status yet, or you haven't applied for it, you need to do that ASAP, because that is a very long process that is beyond our control. So that could be a 4 to 6 month window. So it's extremely important that if you are serious about applying for 28, get that in ASAP. That final status that you need to have in hand will be due to us by April 23rd. So circle that date if you're taking notes. Final status, you need to have it. No excuses, will be due by no later than April 23rd, 2023. Okay. So the other pathway through TEC is the subchapter E, and that's if you're a public college or university. All right, so now that we've discussed who can apply, what applications are available for you. So if you're a subchapter D, the majority of our applicants qualify as new operators. So they fill out the new operator application. And if you're a new operator, that means your entity has not operated a charter school before, and you're seeking authorization to us under this subchapter D, right? So, but simply, you have never operated a charter school before, you're a new operator. However, there's also room to qualify as an experienced operator and fill out an experienced operator application. We have 3 main buckets this year that would define you as an experienced operator. The first one is you're an eligible entity that you're affiliated with an out-of-state charter management organization, which we call a CMO, with multiple years of academic performance data. The other bucket is if your entity operates a district authorized charter campus in Texas, again, with multiple years of academic performance data. And then that last bucket is if your entity is actually incorporated in the state of Texas, but you manage and operate at least one charter school out of Texas, again, with multiple years of academic performance. If you fit within any of those 3 buckets, then you would fill out the experienced operator application. And if you're a public college university pursuing a subchapter E charter, then subchapter E has its own application. So that would mean if you're a public junior college, public senior college, or public university, you can apply for the subchapter E and you fill out that application. All right, let's take a deep dive into the parts of the application package. You know, as Marion said, we have a very robust application, right? It's a lot, right? But we also try and prepare you through this application to go through exercises and considerations that will hopefully steer you towards making that A or B rated right out the gate. So the first piece of our application package is the instructions and guidance document. I'm not one of those people that typically reads directions, right, or the manual, but in this case, you got to read it. It's extremely important. In that, you'll find the eligibility criteria that we just discussed, timelines, key dates, and submission instructions. I really want to focus in on that submission instruction. So as you get down the line, if you have any questions about, or you forget today, like how to submit it, you will find most of that information, if not all that information, in the instructions guidance doc. If you still have questions, you can reach out to us. And then the big mamma jamma is number 2, the narrative document, right? And so we're going to talk about this in detail, but for right now, I just want you to understand, this is the document that you download that has all the questions in it. It has all the questions, and you're going to put all your responses in it. There's no separate response document. This is it. This is what you're going to download and submit, right? So in that document, you're going to have the executive summary that you're going to fill out. There's an application checklist for you all. You're going to put your narrative responses, as I said, and then also you're going to complete a letter of special assurances. All of that is in that one document. And then number 3, we have quite a bit of attachments in our application, but collectively we kind of call them the attachments. And so Natalie and I are going to discuss what those attachments kind of are and what that will look like for the submission process. But for right now, just understand that we have a very robust attachment section. And then 4 and 5 cover our workbooks. So number 4, every applicant is going to fill out a financial plan workbook. Whether you're a new operator, experienced operator, or sub-E, doesn't matter. You're going to fill out a financial plan workbook. Joe Herrera from our financial compliance division will be speaking with you all later this morning about that and showing you all a pretty detailed kind of preview of what those look like. This supplements a budget narrative and financial plan. And then number 5, the portfolio overview workbook is for experienced operators only. All right, we're going to talk about the narrative document. So as those who have been able to open it, you realize that is a fillable PDF. It has expandable response boxes. So as I said, you're going to put all your responses in this document. So when you open it, you're going to see all the questions with the response boxes directly below it. You're going to put your responses in there. Once you click out of that box, it's going to auto expand to meet the length of the response. There are also tables in there where you can add and delete rows. So we just, again, ask you to remember that those are expandable too. So you don't need to try and squeeze everything into one box. You can add rows if you want, and they're expandable. Resource pages. So last year we tried something new and it was very successful. And so we wanted to keep it this year. We found it very helpful, and survey data also showed that most of the applicants found these resource pages helpful. So when you open that narrative doc, on every section, whether it's school safety, governance, startup plan, whatever, right? There's a button at the top of that page that says terminology, resources, and evaluation criteria. So you're going to click that button, and it's going to show you all the terminology and resources that we feel thus far that we feel that applicants are going to be extremely benefited from, and hopefully really help engage you in some good considerations for quality response. And then also there's evaluation criteria. So when you open that resource page, if you scroll all the way down to the bottom of that resource page, you will see the evaluation criteria for that specific section. This is extremely important, and I want to mention this, and I don't want to gloss over it, right? So those evaluation criteria that you see on that document on each section, those are the exact criteria that we send to external reviewers, right? So those aren't summaries, those are the literal criteria that external reviewers get to score each application. So it's important that before you submit your application that you're aligning your responses with those criteria. All right, so someone had a question about how to view the document because a lot of people have problems with this. So as I said, the document is a fillable PDF, and web browsers are not super friendly to fillable PDFs, right? So many of you, if you've tried to open it through a web browser, right, it will say something like, please wait. You'll get a please wait sign, and it will never show up. So what you have to do, once you do it, you'll never forget it. It's super easy, right? So you're going to download the narrative document. You're going to download it to your desktop or any other folder on your computer. So what we say, you're going to save it locally. When you save it, on the bottom, you'll see that little download ribbon. The internet's going to say, do you want to open it? You don't want to open it because it's going to try and open it through Chrome or Internet Explorer or whatever. What you want to do is go to your desktop or wherever you saved it on your computer and click on that file. Okay, so don't try and open it from the download ribbon on the bottom. You're going to get the same please wait sign. You're going to download it to your computer, and then you're going to open it from your computer. All right, that should solve it. Last year, we spent some meetings troubleshooting with applicants, so please don't be afraid to email us and say, I still can't open this. Can you please set up some time to help me? We will certainly help you try and open the narrative document. All right, so the attachments. So our attachments live across 3 different forms, really. As I said, we have a lot of attachments. Most of them are kind of procedural or just very technical things like bylaws, audit information, things like that, right? But nonetheless, you can access each and every attachment in the narrative document, right? So I mentioned that checklist. So I think it's page maybe 2 or 3 of the narrative document, there's a checklist. Those attachments are hyperlinked. So you can access any attachment through the cover sheet, or if you're scrolling through the application, let's just say you get to the discipline policy section of the application, it's listed there as well. So there's multiple entry points and access points for the attachments. When you click those links, it's going to take you to an attachment, what we call cover sheet. You can think of it as directions, right? So the attachment cover sheet gives you each and every bit of information you need to complete that attachment. You're going to include those cover sheets in your submission, okay? And Natalie's going to talk to you a little bit about that in a minute. However, some of our cover sheets do have fillable forms with them. As an example, board members have to fill out bylaws. So I believe it's attachment G1 or G2. Though that biographical affidavit is a fillable PDF. So your board members need to put their information in that form, and then that's what you submit behind the cover sheet, okay? And then the last of the worksheets, we already mentioned it's a financial plan workbook and the portfolio overview summary workbook. I mention it again because I just want to remind you all that these are provided to you as an Excel document, as an Excel workbook. You're going to complete it in Excel, but you're also going to submit it to us in Excel, okay? So if you've applied in the past, sometimes you've had to make them PDF. You don't need to do that anymore. You're going to fill it out as an Excel, and you're going to submit it as an Excel. All right. We're going to talk about terms and concepts, and apologies for my voice today. It's a little hoarse. All right, pop quiz, everybody. What's the difference between a school board and the sponsoring entity? Just kidding, that's a trick question. There is no difference, right? So the sponsoring entity, so that's going to be the entity that is applying for the charter school. If you are awarded a charter school, you then become the school board. So as an example, if you have 5 board members on your sponsoring entity of Charter ABC Inc., and you were awarded a charter, then those 5 members have just become board members, school board members. And this is important because the sponsoring entity, if you get a charter school, you do not start like a subsidiary school board, right? You are the board member. So it's extremely important as you prepare for this application that you present board members that are going to be qualified to run a successful charter school. All right. So as a reminder, if you're awarded charter, you're going to be legally responsible for that charter school and its students. You're going to set governance standards. You're going to establish policies. You're going to manage the superintendent. You're even going to evaluate whether or not the charter school is successful. And then lastly, you're going to ensure that there's statutory compliance. So all of those duties are to the board on a legal level. There's some things that the governing board cannot do. And it begs to mention that board members cannot be compensated. And that's kind of a mind blower to some people. But if you sit on the school board, you are not compensated. So for those applicants who want to be on the school board, you will not be compensated. If you do want to be compensated, you need to step down from the board, either before or after you submit the application. Board members can serve as employees of the school if they step down from the board. So board members cannot be employees of the school at the same time, but nothing prevents you from stepping down to be a paid employee. And then that also begs to mention the superintendent. Okay, so the superintendent is a paid position, but that superintendent cannot sit on the board. I want to repeat that. The superintendent is a paid position, but cannot sit on the board. Okay, and the board members cannot be the superintendent unless they step down to become the superintendent. Those two positions are separate and cannot coexist at the same time with the same person. Boards cannot elect members that violate nepotism restrictions or elect members that have been convicted of certain crimes. And so at this point, I'm going to go ahead and mention in about 2 weeks, when we send you that email that the FAQ document is up, we're also going to mention to you that our presentation on charter school law is also available. So in that presentation, it's a PDF file. It will outline what those nepotism restrictions are. It will also outline what crimes would bar a member from serving on the board. And it will also highlight, and this is probably the most important, the school board cannot delegate certain duties that are legally required. They can't delegate those to third parties. There are some that can be delegated to third parties, but most of them cannot be, and those are outlined in that charter school presentation. All right, So another question, are you all applying for a school or campus? I think Marion kind of gave this away earlier, but you are applying for a charter school. So a charter school should be considered as an LEA, a local education agency, as a district level, right? So in your application, you are applying for one charter, okay? One charter that's going to propose one or more campuses. Certain applicants have made this mistake in the past and come to us and said, hey, here's all 3 of my applications, right? There's one application, and in that one application, you say, hey, I want one campus or I want X number of campuses, okay? So the board governs at the school level, again, like a school district, not a campus. So the campus doesn't have separate board members, all right? So in terms of campuses, the number of campuses that you propose is extremely important, right? It needs to be necessary to facilitate the mission and vision of your school. But those campuses also need to be within your geographic boundary. And we'll talk about what that is on the next slide. And then also, I just wanted to mention expansion, all right? And then going back to why it's important to list a number of campuses that are necessary to facilitate your mission and vision. If in your application, you say you want 3 campuses, then you get awarded and you're like, actually, Mr. Garland, I want 5 campuses. We're going to tell you no, right? So the number of campuses that you put in your application is what you're going to be held to, at least on the maximum end, which you're going to be held to, until you are eligible for expansion, which, hear me when I say this, is not going to be until at least the end of year 3. And that's based on approval for accountability ratings and other factors. So spend some real quality time thinking about how many campuses are necessary. All right, and so I'm gonna end my piece of this on geographic boundaries, and we're gonna spend a couple of minutes on this because it's important. So charter schools define their enrollment boundaries by the actual geographic boundaries of the traditional school district, right? Okay, so what that means if you want to be in Dallas ISD, your proposed boundary will be Dallas ISD, meaning you're going to pull students from within the geographic boundary of Dallas or Austin ISD or whatever ISD, right? There is no bar against how many districts make up your geographic boundary, okay? And they do not need to necessarily be contiguous either. But geographic boundaries are at the charter school level, at that LEA level, right? So again, in your application, each campus does not have separate geographic boundaries, okay? Geographic boundaries are at that charter district LEA level. All right, so applicants have like 2 different sort of structures that they can choose in terms of their geographic boundaries. The first one's the more traditional geographic boundaries setup, which is you're going to say we're going to pick the geographic boundaries of district A, B, C, D, E, F, right? And any student within any of those school districts can apply and enroll on a first come, first served basis. In any event, if your applications exceed the available seats that you have, you're going to have a lottery, all right? But either way, in a traditional sense, the geographic boundaries is going to be we want 5 districts, and any student in any of those districts can apply on first come, first served basis, right? So that's option A. Option 2 is an applicant can designate a primary and secondary set of boundaries. So what that looks like is kind of going back to district A, B, C, D, E, F. If applicant says, well, we really want to just prioritize a zip code in district A, that's going to be our primary boundary. And that means that students that reside within that zip code are enrolled first. Okay, and then if there are available seats, then any student residing in the secondary boundary would then be enrolled, okay? But again, as a reminder, in any event, those students have to reside within the geographic boundary. So if you set a primary boundary, then they need to be residents of that primary boundary. And again, we're gonna have some Q&A after this. I know it's a lot of information where we can kind of expound on this, and then we'll also have some time at the end of the day. All right, Natalie, I'm gonna turn it over to you.
Okay, great, thanks. So next we're going to talk about a couple of essential requirements for the application. The first is the statement of impact package. This is a statement of impact package includes notifications to all superintendents, school board presidents, and elected officials within your proposed geographic boundary that John was just discussing. You're notifying them of your intent to apply for charter. So this year, we've included a helpful list of elected officials organized by ISD, and you can access this resource from a link included within the narrative document. The packages must be sent by certified mail, and they consist of the following three components: a cover letter and the statement of impact form, both of which have templates that are included within the attachment download linked in the narrative document. Thirdly, however, you must also include the applicant profile page, which is really the first true page of the narrative document after the checklists. All of these together, once again, should be sent via certified mail to all of those individuals just discussed. And now we will talk about public meetings that John also mentioned. So this is also a requirement. The purpose of this meeting, not unlike the statement of impacts, is to notify the public of your intent to apply for charter and the general contents of that proposal. So at least one meeting is required, though you may have more than one. However, for at least that one meeting, it can be virtual or in person, and it must be open to the public. You cannot limit access or attendance to that meeting. Additionally, public notice must be provided through a widely circulated publication like a newspaper, and that posting can be in the classified section, but the circulation of that publication that you choose must cover the proposed geographic boundary of the charter. So for instance, if I'm looking to apply for a charter for a school in Travis County, then I would not put a notice in the Houston Chronicle. And finally, there is an email notice component. So you must also notify the individuals that you reach out to through the statement of impact. So the elected officials, superintendents, and board presidents that you have already contacted, you must send them an email notifying them of the scheduled public meeting no later than 5 days in advance of it taking place. All right, now we will go into detail about the steps for submission. All right, just another reminder, as with last year's application, there is no paper submission, okay? We are doing fully digital submissions for these applications, and the due date will be November 4th by 5 p.m. Everything will be submitted digitally to ShareFile, and the ShareFile link is included in the instructions and guidance document accessible on the applicant's webpage. The steps for submitting are as follows. First, save the narrative document as a PDF file. This document already includes all of the narrative responses, the application checklist, and the letter of special assurances. Secondly, you will need to create an attachments submission document, which is one single PDF. This includes the attachment cover sheets with the corresponding attachments behind them in order. And some attachments, like organizational bylaws, may already be pre-existing documents that you would need to then combine into the rest of the attachments in order and create one PDF. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. Next, make sure that the financial plan workbook is updated and aligned with all the associated budget numbers disclosed in the narrative document. This will be saved and submitted as a separate Excel file, and it should not be combined with the attachments document or the narrative document. And the financial plan workbook is downloadable through the narrative document. And in the event that you're applying as an experienced operator, you'll have an additional Excel document, which is the portfolio overview workbook. This is also downloaded from the narrative document. It must be completed and saved as such and submitted separately. So just to review, in total, for new operator applications, there will be 3 file submissions, 2 PDF files, the first of which is the narrative document, the second of which is the attachment submission document, and thirdly, the Excel file, which is the financial plan workbook that will be discussed here in a presentation in a few moments. If you're an experienced operator, there will be 4 file submissions. Those 2 PDFs that I just discussed, that financial plan workbook Excel document, and then the 4th document is the portfolio overview workbook, which is an additional Excel document. All right, as far as assembling the attachments submission document, it does require some extra steps. So you'll need to save all of the attachments in order with the cover sheets and corresponding pages as mentioned as one PDF. That's our goal here. There are really 2 ways to do this. The first one is to print all of the documents, put them in order, and scan them in as one single PDF. Or if you have the capability and familiarity to do this entirely digitally, then you would just combine all of the documents into one PDF and then save as a flat PDF file. This means that you would need to follow the steps as if you were going to print it, but instead of printing, you would select Save as PDF or Print as PDF from the drop-down menu in the print window. And you would use the naming convention to save this, as is indicated in the instructions and guidance document. And if you name the file appropriately, it really helps us ensure that once the upload is completed, you have everything that you need and it's all been submitted on time. For the attachments document, you also need to insert separate page numbers. This would be in the bottom right-hand corner. Each page number would begin with the letter A for attachment, and you can do this by hand if you like. These page numbers should also be included in the table of contents in the narrative document where that letter A prefix is already entered. And finally, submit the attachments files, at least the attachment submission document and the financial plan workbook for new operators, or with the addition of the portfolio overview workbook for experienced operators, to the share file link included in the instructions and guidance document. All right, we're going to talk a little bit more in depth about the scoring and review process. Now, this process begins after your application has been reviewed for completion. This is what Marian was mentioning in her opening presentation. So please know that TEA staff do not internally evaluate the applications. The evaluations are done entirely by highly qualified external reviewers. So each application that is deemed complete is scored by 5 separate reviewers. The 5 separate scores are then averaged together, dropping the highest and the lowest reviewer scores. Whichever is higher between the adjusted score and the average score is then taken. We're looking for scores of 85% or higher. However, in the event that a score lands between 80% or 84%, then that application is automatically sent to a 6th reviewer for an additional score. All right, to illustrate the overall review process, we're going to revisit this concept of the funnel again. The applications are reviewed internally only for completion and to determine if documents are needed for completion. So that as part of the completion check, you will have the opportunity of a brief window of time to cure, and we TEA staff will notify you of that process. Then once they are deemed complete, they're sent to external review as just discussed. Next, the high scoring applications will be internally analyzed by TEA staff in preparation for the capacity interviews. The interview will take place, after which the Commissioner of Education will recommend certain charters for approval. After this, the State Board of Education will convene at their June meeting and vote with the option to veto any of the recommended charters for award. Once the contract is awarded, the schools would open, as in this cohort, for instance, in the fall of 2024. All right. We are excited to again offer our optional supports, including the support seminars. So these are a series of hour-long webinars focusing on topics that have been brought up time and time again by previous applicants, internal TEA analysis, external reviewers, and State Board of Education members about areas of improvement that we would like to see in the applications. Many of these sessions will feature TEA staff discussing important reminders for application completion or providing more illustration of TEA resources that are included within the narrative in the resource pages. These will be presented in a Zoom webinar format, just like today, and so they do require advanced registration, just like today. The link to register for each session is available on that additional supports page that John demoed for us, along with the topics for each of those dates. Please note that the seminars will be taking place on Wednesdays this year from 3:30 to 4:30 p.m. And we hope that you can attend. Our survey data from last year's attendees indicated that 100% of participants found these optional seminars helpful. As well, if you don't have the opportunity to attend, the recordings of these seminars will be uploaded to the webpage underneath those buttons where you would register. And any questions that are addressed will be updated in our FAQ document so that everyone has access to these resources. And at a minimum, just a sort of shameless plug here, our final support seminar will be taking place in November, just days before the application due date. And that is a presentation by John and I to just cover and reiterate all of the final steps and best practices for submission. So if you get into this process and you have questions about things we're talking about today, please don't worry. There is an optional support seminar where we will reiterate the steps for submission assembly so you can feel at ease about that final submission. And additionally, we are offering regular office hours to help support applicants. So these will also take place on Wednesdays. We have changed the schedule this year so that the support seminars will take place first in consecutive weeks, and then the office hours will take place next in consecutive weeks. And the reason for this is so that you can avail yourselves of the resources presented in those support seminars, have time to troubleshoot, and then come to the office hours later with questions. So they begin September 14th. These will serve as drop-in Q&A time with the New Schools team, and they will also take place on Zoom, but through a regular meeting format. We'll answer questions to the best of our ability, but as John mentioned, at this time, we can't really offer any competitive advice. We can really just clarify aspects of the process or redirect you to resources as needed. But one interesting thing that happened with last year's sessions that we would really like to let you know about is that when there were questions or problems that we couldn't really talk through with the applicants, we found that they crowdsourced among each other. And so these office hours really became spaces for collaboration for applicants to network and support each other. And that was a really nice upshot. All right, before we conclude our presentation of the application overview, I just want to pause for a minute and reiterate some of these key takeaways from today. So number one, remember that the generation application is accessed through the applicant's webpage. You can navigate to the applicant's webpage from the charter school homepage. Remember that this application is entirely digital. It's an adaptable PDF file that should be downloaded and saved to your computer before you enter anything into it. You otherwise won't be able to. And the attachments submission document will be a separate PDF, and the financial plan workbook will be a separate Excel file. But all these documents, all these three documents together will constitute your final application submission. Unless, of course, you're applying as an experienced operator, in which case you would have that additional fourth document, which is the portfolio overview workbook. Remember that the application is due November 4th by 5 p.m. And the submission process is simply a digital upload to ShareFile. No paper submissions required. Finally, remember there are these additional supports that we strongly encourage you participate in. They're available to you throughout the months of August through October, including the support seminars arranged by topic and the open Q&A office hours. We really hope to see you there. As always, you can reach out to John and I via email. We will do our best to answer your questions. Thank you so much for participating. Thank you for your interest in this process. We're now going to open up for Q&A to address any questions that may have arisen during this presentation.
So Natalie, really quick, before we jump into Q&A, I just wanted to highlight 2 points and just kind of drive them home, which is important. So Natalie said that you all are applying to open in 2024, right? So I just want you all to understand that's a 2-year process, right? So from now until you actually are authorized, if you're authorized, that's a year. Then there's a required startup year, right? You can't waive that right now. So that's 2 years. I just want everyone to understand that you are 2 years out from opening your doors. So for those applicants who are wanting to be on a more expedited timeline, again, unfortunately, this is where we are in our process. It's a 2-year process. Again, this is to ensure that by the time you open those doors, you're ready. And again, that you have prepared everything you need to prepare to get that A or B rated and to serve those students with fidelity. So that's number one. Number two, I just want to say it so I can say that I said it, is the submission timeline, right? So November 4th by 5 p.m. Central Standard Time. If we don't have all of those documents, then that's incomplete. So we say this and we're going to say it time and time again. You're going to get emails from us time and time again about this, reminding you that on submission day, you need to carve out enough time to get us that information by 5 o'clock. We just cannot make any exceptions, hurricane, tornado, winning the lottery, right? Whatever it is, 5 p.m. So I need to say it so I can say that I said it. With that said, yeah, let's do some Q&A. Let's see.
All right, so I've got them pulled up in the Q&A function, the ones that we were not able to address just yet. The first question is, when is the statement of impact package required to be sent? What's the time frame?
Yeah, so that's going to be before you submit your application. So on November 4th, you're going to need to provide proof that you have sent those statement of impact packages to all the required elected officials and ISD recipients. So by November 4th, with your application, all of them need to have been sent.
All right, and we have an additional question that I think is connected to a previous question about expansion. So I can take this one just to clarify. So the original charter proposal should propose all of the grade levels that the charter intends to serve within their first 5 years of operation until after they are eligible for expansion. Typically, charters are sort of generous in this vision. They like to go ahead and propose the maximum number of grade levels that they would like to grow in. It's often called a slow growth model, where you you start with just a couple of grade levels and then add a grade level year after year as your students matriculate up. So I hope that answers your question. Once you become eligible for expansion amendments, you can add those grade levels. But generally, we would advise that a lot of that thinking and planning should be on the front end and included within the original application proposal. All right, the next question is about the TEA Incubator Program. So we are actually going to defer that question for a little while because we're going to have a special blurb about the Incubator Program at the end of today's information session. So as we close, so if you'll please forgive us, we're going to defer for a little while, but we will answer your question later on today. Next, we have a question about a 90-10 two-way dual language Spanish immersion model. Will TEA enlist content reviewers who are well-versed in this highly rigorous model? We note that in Texas, most districts offer a less rigorous 50-50 DL model. That's a great question. So our external reviewers have been doing this in many cases for many years and are experts in terms of best practices and legal requirements for charters. There is not specific criteria in the application for specific dual language models. We strongly encourage that you review those evaluation criteria embedded in the resource pages to see how your proposal will be evaluated, especially when it comes to program design and serving student populations like emergent bilingual or English learner students. However, should the application move beyond the external review phase, part of the internal TEA staff who conduct an analysis in advance of the capacity interview are content and program experts in these areas. So I hope that that addresses your question. Please feel free to describe this proposal in detail in your application, but I would strongly consider or strongly urge you to look at the criteria to see how you will be evaluated, but know that further down the line, should the application move into internal analysis phase, there will be experts looking at that. All right, John, will this recording be provided to us?
Yes. So for the person who asked that question, yes, the recordings will be provided to you all. However, they will not be provided to you all until we have our second session next week. So we kind of pick which is the better one. But again, any questions that are provided today and answered today, they'll be reflected in the FAQ document.
Thank you, John. I've got another question for you. Is there a step-by-step process to download the application? We have some prospective applicants who've downloaded it but can't save changes.
Yes. Yeah, so what I suspect is happening is I believe maybe Internet Explorer is good about previewing the application. So either you're trying to fill it out within the browser and it's not letting you do saving, but we'll troubleshoot it later today. And for those who are having problems opening it, please email the charter application inbox as you see on this screen in front of you, and we will set up a time to kind of troubleshoot with you. But by and by, as a reminder, you're going to download it to your desktop or whatever computer, wherever on your computer, and then you're not going to try and open it from that ribbon that pops up on the bottom of the screen. Okay, you're going to go to your desktop, and where you see it on your desktop, Gen 28 narrative doc, you double click on that one. That should open up. You should be able to save that version. But we'll do some quality control later today to see if there's a saving issue, but there shouldn't be, but we'll check on it.
Okay, I've got another question for
Yes.
you, John. If the board members and or superintendent change people, will that become a problem for who attended the mandatory meeting?
No, that shouldn't be a problem. If it makes you all feel better in your application, you are certainly welcome to say, who attended this webinar, and depending on that, we can look that name up, and if those names check out, then you've met your requirement. But no, generally it's not a problem.
All right, and John, do I have to have star grade levels at my school?
Yes, you do. That's a great question. So at minimum, by I believe the end of your, and correct me if I'm wrong, the end of your third year, maybe it's beginning, you need to serve a state tested grade, which in this case would be at least third grade. So at minimum, charter schools need to serve third grade.
I believe it's 50% of your students
50%.
need to be in a
Yes.
state tested grade level by your third year or at the
So
end of your third year. Mhm.
Exactly. So you do not need to start with third grade, but you need to grow into third grade. Will the schedule for, okay, so someone's asking, will the schedule for the weekly optimal support seminars be posted, and when? So those are on our website. As I previewed for you all, each button has a date associated with it, and so you can kind of plan accordingly and register as well. And then someone asked, can some of the 4 or 5, okay, so this question is ultimately, can we submit our information early? Let's just say hypothetically we finish our financial plan. Can we send that today? Nothing prevents you from sending it today. However, we would strongly and highly recommend that you do not do that. Please wait till November 4th, because in the past, people have submitted things early. If you submit things early and then change your mind, we consider what you submit as your final submission, right? So it behooves everyone to just be sure that what you're submitting, whenever you submit it, is your final and most polished product.
We have another question about the Incubator Program and when it will start. So it's actually already started. There are different pathways in the program. And again, Marion will share more information about that at the end of today's session. So if you do have questions or interested in hearing about the Incubator Program, we strongly suggest that you sit through every presentation today and then hear that information at closing. Let's see, we've got a question about STAR testing if you're applying for an early childhood center. So you are absolutely welcome to open your school if awarded with serving at early childhood. That is absolutely welcome. However, the rule still applies that by your third year of operation, you would need to be serving STAR tested grades. So while early childhood may be the focus for the first few years of operation, then you would eventually need to move into state assessed courses. I'm sorry, state assessed grade levels.
I think the next question talks about board member experience, right? So do all board members need to be experienced in education? The answer is no. No, that is not a requirement. What we would recommend you do is go to the narrative document and sort of plugging in those resource pages again. Click the resource page under the governance section. And there we've outlined some of the most, I guess, based on best practice and research, some of those qualifications and competencies and what those kind of like what those topics are that would be good to explore as you're looking for board members. But no, not every board member needs to be experienced in education. We're really looking for a board that has a diverse set of skills, whether that's across each member, whether all board members are just kind of diverse in their qualifications. Again, I want to reiterate, so you all are applying to open up a charter school. And what that means is there's an operations component, there's a financial planning component, there's a safety component, there's facility acquisition component, there's a legal component, and there's an education component, right? So all of these things are going to be things that the board are going to have to traverse through the life cycle of the charter, right? So it behooves applicants to present a board that really is equipped to handle all of those potential issues.
And I'd like to interject with another shameless plug here. Governance best practices, including what different skill sets you would like to have on your board, is going to be the topic of one of our first support seminars, I believe the first one. And so if you do have more questions about governance best practices, we strongly encourage you to avail yourselves of that resource and attend that support seminar. Okay, it looks like we have caught up with our questions for the moment.
All right. So while I pull up the next presentation's materials, I'm going to go ahead and introduce everyone's favorite person, Joe Herrera, in the Financial Compliance Division. So Joe, if you want to come on and introduce yourself, I'll get your stuff ready.
Good morning, everybody. Lots of information already given to you. I'm going to add to it, but this is the fun stuff, finances and dollars and cents. And I'm going to talk to you and give you a lot of information before John sort of and I navigate what it is we're talking about. My portion of this is the financial workbook. You are going to have an opportunity to submit a required financial workbook of your plan, and that workbook will tell an entire story of what you hope to accomplish with your charter school and your organization and those that are involved in your organization and getting it set up and started. So what we're going to do quickly is just talk about some of the things in this presentation that we're going to be looking for, that you're going to need to consider, and that you're going to need to have in place as you're starting to work through your financial workbook. Then we're going to show you the financial workbook and show you how it operates and walk you through some of the steps and give you some helpful tips and tricks to make sure that you don't fall into some of the pitfalls that can possibly happen while you're going through your workbook. Again, a lot of this is very wordy. I'm going to start by reading some of the bullets, but not all of the bullets, because I do want to make sure that we have enough time to actually get into the workbook itself. So if we go to there's my introductory slide. Here we go. So your financial plan needs to provide a narrative of your startup plan. What that looks like, who all is involved, from your planning year to your first year up into the first 5 years. And you'll see how all of that is a timeline of startup and planning through your first 5 years. You're going to want to, that plan is going to outline costs associated with startup activities. You're even going to see some places where you're going to plan for some contingencies, just in case not all of that funding is received by you, or that it's lower than what you expected. You'll also in this workbook be able to describe a lot of the key players in your organization as you start up your charter and get it going. So we go to slide 2. Perfect. You're going to want to present, and actually I think we skipped a slide. I'm sorry, John. There we go. Perfect. So sorry. So you're going to, in this workbook, you'll be able to describe and plan how you intend to either pay for, accommodate, or plan for all of these different roles and responsibilities in your organization. There will be a section when we get into the workbook where you're going to be able to tell us what sort of funds you think you'll be allocating for possible contract services like food services, transportation, any sort of audit services that you may need as you start up and get going with your charter school. Any sort of required funds that are out there, you'll see spaces in the workbook on where to give us that documentation and information. And all along through the workbook, what we'll show you are places where we're going to want narrative information, or where you're going to need to say to us, specific funds are going to be used for X, Y, and Z. For example, I intend to have 5 teachers in my first year. Of the 5, I intend to use specific grant funds for these 3, and state generated funds for this one, and possibly donated funds for this 5th teacher. You're gonna there'll be narrative spaces for you to describe information on how you're allocating funds, specific grant funds, and we'll show you where those spaces are, and so that you don't forget and overlook giving us that narrative information. Here's some required information that you're going to want to give to us when you submit your application. We're going to want to see some of these IRS forms. We're going to want to see commitment letters from possible donors. We're going to want to see anything that you have out there that has been committed to you, or that you're in the process of trying to secure while we're reviewing your application, should you get all the way through the process of your application being reviewed by the financial compliance team. The financial compliance team, we get together and we review all of your documentation. We look at your financial workbook. We question and we ask questions about weird anomalies, or just sort of clarification questions should you get to that point of the process. But the more that you can give us before we get to that process, the easier it is for us to sort of look through your plan and get a better sense and idea of what it is you're trying to financially plan for as you get started with your charter school and your organization. Okay, so now we're going to do some transitioning here. I'm going to use this presentation off screen, and John's going to pull up our financial workbook so that we can get to look at it while I have some narrative information. This is what the financial workbook looks like. It's a large Excel workbook with several tabs at the bottom, and you are responsible for all of the information in it. And we're going to talk to you about how you go about populating this financial workbook and how it all sort of plays together. The first tab at the bottom is general instructions, and I highly recommend that you read the instructions before you begin. If John, if you'll scroll down real quick, you'll see that it's not a lot a lot of information, but you do want to make sure that you are fully aware of what you're about to begin and how you're going to start this before you begin. If you are someone who has large screens or maybe even 2 screens, I highly recommend you open this workbook up twice so that you have the instruction page always on one monitor, and then you're working in your workbook on the second monitor so that you always have that instruction page to refer to, so that you're not flipping back and forth between the tabs and possibly losing your spot. First tip and trick. So again, if you have 2 monitors, really good idea is to have the instructions up on one that are always there, and then working in the workbook on your in the actual workbook itself. You'll see that there are green tabs along the bottom. These green tabs are what you are going to provide with information. All of the blue tabs are information that does not require you to do anything. All of the green tabs populate the information in the blue tabs. If we go ahead and click on the first green tab, which is school information, it's basic school information. You're going to give us this basic information. Anywhere you see a white cell, you're going to be able to enter in information. Anywhere you see a white cell with a red triangle, if you hover over that triangle is going to give you some information, or sort of a definition, or maybe even give you the reason why we're asking for this information. In this instance, when we talk about the minutes per year, 75,600 minutes is required by state law. So we give you that information as to the sort of minutes that you're going to be looking for. Now, are you only going to plan for 75,600? Probably not. You're going to plan for over that, just so that you have some minutes to play with. Should you have a bad weather day, should something happen in your building you have to close for safety, something may occur where it's out of your hands and utilities are clipped, and then you have no electricity for the day. All of that is a factor into the amount of instruction that you're able to provide on any given day, and you need to be able to, at the very end of the year, know that you have fulfilled the obligation of meeting at least 75,600 minutes of operational instruction, and therefore you're going to want to be thoughtful about creating a calendar that exceeds or pads your bank of minutes so that you have some extra to fall back on. First, again, first tab, very basic information. You enter in the information underneath the white cells. Let's go to the enrollment tab. The enrollment tab is a biggie. So this tab is what starts to then populate all of the blue cells in the rest of the workbook. What we're going to ask for you to do is to identify the grade levels that you're going to want to focus on in your first few years, up to 5 years. And you're going to anticipate the number of enrollment per grade level per year. And what I've done is pre-populated that for you. John, if you want to go ahead and just demonstrate populating in the number. You enter in the number, tab over, and it'll populate for you. And if you scroll down, you'll see that the total number there changed as John put in those numbers. Again, all of the white cells, you are able to click and put information in. All of the blue cells will be populated based on the numbers that you give us in the white cells. So here's what is important about that. If while you're working in your workbook and you're plugging in numbers, if all of a sudden further down the workbook, you see all hashtags in a cell, then you've got to go back up and figure out where you may have mistyped a specific number, or maybe added a character instead of a number. Anytime you see hashtags, then you know somewhere in your cell prior, you have accidentally mistyped a specific character. We do ask that where you see most of the numbers that are already decimal pointed. So if you scroll down for just a moment for me, John, to or maybe over to the left. I apologize. We'll scroll to the left. So yes, this is a large workbook that just goes down and to the left. Well, and actually apologize, it might be in the personnel section, but in a lot of spots where you'll see numbers pre-populated, if there's a decimal in that pre-population, you're going to want to add a decimal in that cell. And again, we'll see that in the personnel tab, which is next. But if you scroll back up, I apologize, John. Thank you. You're going to want to populate the enrollment that you anticipate being able to serve each year. And then for the rest of this workbook to work correctly, you have to give us the percentage of ADA that you expect on each given year. So right there at the bottom where I have average daily ADA, and I've said 90%. What I'm saying to TEA is that I expect a 90% average enrollment for that year. 90% is a pretty conservative number, and it's a number that and if John, if you go back to the red triangle again, we even say, you know, maybe even using something like 85. It's very hard to anticipate what you're going to be able to do to make sure that kids show up to school or what your enrollment's going to look like. But your attendance percentage ADA in these cells is what's going to populate the rest of the workbook, and I'll show you what that looks like. If you forget to populate this line, the rest of the workbook will not work for you, and you'll know that you messed up. So this line is very important. Make sure that you populate the percentage of ADA that you expect to achieve in those years to be able to populate the rest of your workbook. And then as you go down this workbook, you're just making predictions because you may not already know what your population looks like, or maybe you know exactly what your population looks like as you send out surveys and you do surveys about the types of populations that you want to target or that you may want to serve. You're going to go in here and estimate the numbers of the types of special populations that you might serve in special education. As we scroll down, you'll see other special populations. If you're going to be a secondary charter that offers career and technology, scrolling further down, we even allocated for special populations where you might want to or think about serving bilingual students, dyslexic students, students who may need pregnancy-related services. Down at the bottom of this is transportation. You know, of the special populations, like you consider transportation for any of these specific kiddos. In our just pre-populated workbook here, we know we're going to transport probably about 10 of our kiddos. So in this cell, this is where you're going to tell us what you think your enrollment population will be and who you think what special populations might make up your enrollment group. This one's all about the kiddos. Now, if we move to the personnel tab, as you might imagine, this one's all about personnel. This is the biggie. So in this cell, and if you'll scroll down, John, you'll see how much we've given folks to work with. A lot. Now, you're not going to use this entire workbook, but it takes a lot of people to run a school. And you need to be thoughtful about the types of positions and the number of people that you're going to need to successfully pull off feeling successful and being successful in the first few years, for sure. So on the personnel tab, you're going to be able to enter in the position description, and you'll just sort of freehand, what that description is. In the second cell under position category, we pre-populate. If John, if you click on that, you'll see a drop-down arrow will pop up. We're going to pre-populate the different kind of categories that your staff may fall under, and you're going to want to sort of align those as best as possible with your position description and what our categories are. In the third column, you're going to talk to us about the annual salary for that position. And you're just going to, again, freehand type in salary numbers and things like that for said positions. In this area where we have decimal points, this is really important for us. These are FTE points. A whole number is a full-time employee. Once we started getting into part-time, then it's a 0.5. So in this instance, in my startup year, I know I have a full-time executive director. I may not need a full-time CFO. Maybe they're only working part-time for me. So I'm going to just have that individual in there as a half-time person. I know in my startup year, I'm going to need to be working with a curriculum director and someone who's working on my curriculum with me, maybe not every day. So in my startup year, maybe they're just half-time. And then they're going to move into being a full-time part of my organization in my first year. In my first year, I'm not going to have teachers and other staff members like that, which is why you see the zeros in that startup year. In my first year, absolutely, I'm going to have that staff, and I'm going to need to be thoughtful about the number of staff I'm going to need as my year goes from 1 to 5. In the notes section of this column, here's where you're going to be able to, you're going to need to tell us if this position is being funded in some way through CSP Grant Funds. Do you anticipate using CSP Grant Funds for this position? And if so, how much funds? How many of said position? For example, where I have regular teachers, I've said my first year I need 2. Are both being funded with CSP funds, just one? This is where you're going to be able to tell us who's being funded with CSP grant funds. If we scroll over to the left, you're going to see what your budget looks like. Now remember, I only had 3 employees when I started here. I had an executive director, a part-time CFO, and a part-time curriculum director. So again, blue cells are all pre-populated based on the information that you give us. So that's why the salaries look the way they do in that startup year. And then in my first year, where my CFO is now full-time, so his 40 went from half to a full 80, and along with my curriculum director from half to a full 60,000. That's where I start to look to see what my salary budget is going to look like. I can, at the top, during my second year, start to play around with the types of raises that I might want to try to budget for and give folks. So, John, if you give everybody a raise in the first year, yeah, those numbers populate to reflect that percentage of a raise. If we scroll to the bottom, then that's where the workbook totals up total numbers for you to look at. So this is a great tab to be able to play with and budget and look at funds and money as you're trying to plan for your staff and the staffing that's needed for your organization. Lots of information, I know, I apologize, but you have incredible people here in the agency who do this every year and help out our folks who are just starting out. The next tab is called the Startup Year and Assumptions tab. And John, if you'll scroll down to the bottom so you can see that tab, there, right there, you got it. So this piece, clicked on this Startup Year and Assumptions green tab, and that's the last green tab that you have to populate. Again, we're going to go through the blue tab, so I'll show you what it is you're expecting to look for. But anything that's blue is pre-populated based on the information you've given us in white cells on the green tabs. So that first box is called total state revenue. where did that $1.7 million come from? That $1.7 million came from the enrollment information that you gave us, based on those kiddos being there 90% of the time. That's why that ADA percentage is very important. If you don't give us an ADA percentage, you're not going to have a state revenue populated for you in this box, which is important because that makes up other parts of your revenue where you see the total revenue at the bottom. The CSP grant funds, that's where you're going to tell us how much money that you expect to apply for or are thinking of applying for in that grant. You can apply for up to $900,000. Doesn't mean you have to apply for all $900,000, but you can apply for up to $900,000 of the CSP grant. And then you'll see it all total there for other revenues that you might want to add into your budget as well for in your startup year and your first year, so that you know what you're looking for. Again, in the notes section, the narrative part, any of these expenses as we go through them that you think will be used using CSP funds, you'll want to describe that for us in that note narrative section of the line item as we go through. And as we go through this specific tab, this is the longest tab, you'll start to see all of the different parts and pieces that you're going to need to think about as you start to plan financially for your organization. The first part of this is, hey, how much money do I have to work with based on my enrollment and any sort of revenues and grant funds that I have. As I work down the workbook, then you start getting a sense of how much money things are going to cost you and how much money you have left and how much money you need to budget for, and maybe even think about raising. So again, some of these numbers were pre-populated based on the personnel tab prior. That's why this is filled out. And you'll see that it has our teachers and our administrators that we populated on the personnel tab, including any sort of raise information and things that we put on there. When we scroll further down, then we start to think about other costs that we need to be prepared to talk about and be able to financially have a story for, like insurance and tax benefits. What do you think those insurance and tax benefits are going to be? And how much is that going to cost you? All of that is outlined in there. Any sort of payroll tax information. Will that number increase as we go by? So you'll see all the percentage increases where you're going to have an increase in that area as your year goes on. Contracted services here at the bottom. What am I going to need in my first few years? Am I going to need a contract for accounting, legal services? Probably yes. How am I going to feed all my kids? Am I going to contract that service out? Or am I going to use revenue that I'm earning and gaining for that sort of a thing? Again, if you're going to anticipate a percentage increase, you'll see that to the left of these cells, you can add in where you might see an increase in that sort of area. And again, even to the left of that, always in a narrative, letting us know if you think anything from these areas might be used with your grant fund that's available to you. If we keep going down, there's a whole school operations section that you'll need to be mindful of. What's it going to take to operate the school? Am I going to infrastructure-wise, supply-wise, and material-wise? Even below that, there are infrastructure costs. It costs to light up the building. What does my rent and lease look like? Am I paying for my property? All of that's there. When you get to the bottom of this, it's going to add up your total expenses and any sort of net and operation costs that you might need to think of while you're there. have an opportunity to put in some contingency reserve amounts if you think you'll need them. And again, if those contingency reserve amounts are coming from the grant in that notes area, you'll let us know that you're using grant money for your contingency reserve, and of that total, if it's a total, if not, how much of that total. So all the green pieces, green tabs have been populated. You've had a thoughtful conversation with your board and your organization about all the different parts and pieces. Not every single white cell needs to be filled out with something. You may not choose to contract with something or someone for someone. You may not choose to have some sort of systems in place that are listed on there. If that's the case, you just leave that area blank. You're only going to populate with information that you anticipate and hope to be able to provide. So you've filled out all your green squares. Now let's look at what our blue tabs look like, because everything that you've done in green populates the blue. And what the blue does is give you sort of overall an overall picture of what it is you just budgeted for. So total expenses are here, total revenues are here, and these sort of anticipated revenues for by student population, and these sort of costs that you budgeted for administrative and facility wise. Again, always where you see a red triangle, where we've tried to give you some information on the types of information that's included in that cell or in that area. Again, all of this pre-populated for you based on the information that you've given us. So here's a really good example. John, if you'll scroll up and we look at year 4 and 5, and we look at revenues by pupil, you're going to see some weird sort of just coding text in there. And why is that? Because on the enrollment tab, if we go back to the enrollment tab, I didn't populate year 4 and 5. So it doesn't know how to calculate that on based on the information that's there. So again, anywhere you see some weird code text in the cell, especially in a blue cell, that means that you have missed information, giving us information in one of the white cells. And if you do run into some weird coding in the blue cell that you don't understand, or you feel like I have gone back and I have, tried to figure out where I may have missed something, you can spin your wheels for a long time trying to figure that out, or email, pick up the phone, give the agency a call, and we're more than happy to help you sort of identify what that issue might be with your workbook. The last thing you're going to want to do is get all the way to the final interview steps and submit a workbook that has that coding. So when the financial team is reviewing your financial workbook, they're not able to tell what your numbers or what your intentions are with your budget, your numbers, because we're just looking at hashtag weird coding and not actual numbers. So you don't want to find yourself in that situation where the financial compliance team just can't figure out what it is you're trying to budget for, and can't figure out what you're trying to tell us with your budget because maybe you missed something in a cell prior. That's a picture of your overall budget. Let's look at the next blue tab. And again, all of this is information only, and all of this changes based on the numbers that you put in on the green tabs. So if you're looking at numbers and thinking, gosh, how can I, move up and down in certain areas, then you go back into your green tabs, and in that specific area, start, rearranging your budget to fall in with the amounts that you're for sure of or know of. So again, this is just information for you. And then this last tab is what's called a summary of finance tab. And it's going to be different for everybody. Again, it's just basic information that's out there. That information is, it reports information and takes into consideration tax collection numbers, tax rates, property values, the number of students that make up special ed, number of students on the average daily attendance that might be weighted. So all of that is sort of calculated, built into the workbook based on TEA formulas in finance, and gives you an idea of what it is you're looking at in a summary of finance. The last tab is a payment formula example. Basically, this is an example based on remember we went back to where did that 1.7 million come from, and the 7.1 or the 1.7 million came from your enrollment numbers based on 90% average daily attendance. Well, this is what those payments to you from TEA would look like on a monthly basis. And again, this is just an example based on the information you give us. It's not exact, but this is an idea of the kind of payment plan that you'll be able to see coming from TEA to you in your first few years. And this goes month to month. And that's it. That's the financial workbook. Easy peasy, right? Let's stop to see if anyone has any questions.
Hey, Joe, before we take any questions, can you
Yes,
hear me?
sir.
Just wanted to elaborate a little bit. So yes, as Joe said, if you're having technical issues with the financial plan workbook, please reach out to us. Just to clarify, if you do have questions, it helps us if you do not send us your financial plan workbook, right? So don't send us that. What you can do is say, hey, Mr. Herrera, Mr. Garland, whoever, I'm having problems with the personnel tab, row G, column, or, just give us a cell reference. And then we can tell you that cell is being fed by whatever is on whatever other tab, right? So we can really troubleshoot with you that way. We just don't want you trying to send us your whole financial plan workbook for obvious reasons. But we are, again, certainly happy to help you at any stage of this process to make sure that what you do submit is complete.
I wanted to. Sorry. Yes, I will piggyback on that and say that while we appreciate you might wanting us to look at your workbook, we by no means are going to be able to tell you or will ever tell you what you should put in a cell. So if we just have on this cell I'm having a problem, we can work back to what's populating it, but we're not going to ever get in a situation where we're saying, oh, well, put this number here and that number there.
Perfect. So Joe, it looks like we have one question so far. This person wants to know, are you still funded at half if pre-K is still a full day program? Like, how does that look?
Yes. So
Okay.
if you run a full day pre-K program, you are still funded at half. And there's no longer a waiver for that. Waivers, TA stopped giving out waivers for that in the 21-22 school year.
Let's see. We don't have any other open questions. We're going to give it a few more seconds to
Sure.
see if anyone has some more questions.
This is always the fun part of the process, the money process, and manipulating all those numbers and trying to come up with a great budget that everyone can agree with.
So I did want to give, as we're waiting, and maybe the final statement to this presentation, is that as you work on this process, what we do notice is that applicants tend to nest this sort of information into one person, right? And then if you get to the interview, typically it's the one person talking. I think it's good practice as the applicant team, and I want to emphasize team, prepares the application, the financial plan workbook, is that the team, is familiar with it kind of the whole step of the way, right? Not just saying, hey, Joe's going to handle the financial plan workbook. None of us have to worry about that. And, because again, Joe could win the lottery and you all just happen to make an interview and then no one's able to really speak specifically and with some real granularity about the workbook. So it just behooves applicants to kind of expose themselves to most, if not all, parts of the application preparation process. So in case you do get to that interview, everyone's prepared.
And I would just like to come off mute really quickly and add to that. Remember that there does need to be alignment between the financial plan workbook and the narrative document. And there are explicit criteria about this. So our criteria are the best we can do to guide you with how to answer effectively. And just know that that is there and that that's accessible to you. And so you definitely want to be checking that prior to submitting your full application package.
Joe, it doesn't look like you have any other questions. So
Great.
that said, if applicants do have any other questions, feel free to email us and we'll provide those in the FAQ document when we release that. But thank you, Joe. Thank you, Pija, so much for joining us today. For those in attendance, of course, for those in attendance, it's 11 o'clock. We're about 10 minutes early, which means you get a longer lunch. So we will see you back
You're welcome.
Promptly and exactly at 11:40. So at 11:40, come on back and we will jump into, I believe, CSP, the Charter School Startup Grant. All righty, see you all in 40 minutes.
Everybody, welcome back. We are going to kick off the after lunch sessions, talking about the Charter School Program Startup Grant overview. So we are going to give kind of an overview of the Charter School Program Grant, allowable uses of funds and things so that you're able to adequately answer the questions that are in the application, as well as plan your budget for these potential funds too. So let's go ahead and get us kicked off here. Again, I'm Marian Shetty. I'm the Director of Charter School Authorizing here at the agency. And then we have other TEA CSP Startup Grant contacts as well. So Lindsay Denman is our Director of Resources and Support here in the Charter Schools Authorizing Division. Melissa Giesberg, who is our Senior Research Specialist and helps support the CSP grant as well. And then Charlotte Werman and Eleanor Blaze are our two grant managers through the Division of Grants Administration for two different components of the CSP program grant. So those might be some names that you see frequently here on our team, as well as in the grants division when you're working on anything related to the Charter School Program grant. But anything that you're working on, we will talk to you about those expectations, what we're looking for, and help you through that as well too. So our goals for this session are to talk about the purpose of the Federal Charter Schools Program. We'll talk about eligible applicants and allowable and unallowable uses of funds. And then we'll talk about the items in the application that address the CSP Startup Grant requirements. So first and foremost, let's talk about the purpose of the Charter Schools Program. So the Charter Schools Program is a grant and competition and program that the U.S. Department of Education runs that state entities are eligible to apply for. So as the state entity, the Texas Education Agency has applied for and has received a $100 million Charter School Program grant from 2020 to 2025. So if you might have heard about CSP lately, you might have heard about lots of news about new regulations and new grant competitions. Those affect future competitions and future grants. So they don't currently affect our grants here in the moment. So the purpose of the Charter Schools Program grant is to expand opportunities for all students, particularly traditionally underserved students, to attend public charter schools and meet challenging state academic standards, really aligned with what you all are trying to do when you open up a charter school here in Texas. And then provide financial assistance for the planning, program design, and initial implementation of charter schools. You're going to hear these words planning and implementation a lot in this session. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well too. And then lastly, ultimately, to increase the number of high quality charter schools available to students across the United States. So really in alignment with our application process as we're trying to increase the number of high quality charter schools available to students across Texas. So let's talk about eligible applicants. So eligible applicants, and these are many of the things that I'm going to talk to you today are federal guidelines and federal requirements. And so TEA does not have a lot of wiggle room or say in these things. We are required as the grantee to follow a very certain and specific set of rules and law related to the charter school program grant. And so many of the things that we've actually set or outlined here that folks want flexibilities from are actually guidelines from the U.S. Department of Education, and we're not actually able to change them. So now let's dive into eligible applicants. So eligible applicant means a developer or a charter applicant, right, that has applied to an authorized public chartering authority, so in this instance TEA, to operate a charter school and provided adequate and timely notice to that authority. So what is, a sponsoring entity, so we'll talk about a little bit here. Your timely notice is your application to the agency submitted on time, by the way. A sponsoring entity becomes eligible to apply for the CSP grant by submitting your Generation 28 application by the application deadline. So if you submit your application for Generation 28, you're eligible to apply. And then we have included the CSP application for new charter schools into the Generation 28 application. So there's not a separate application that you have to fill out. And then you become sponsoring entities or nonprofit organizations become eligible for award if the charter school is recommended by the commissioner and not vetoed by SBOE. So essentially you become eligible for award if you make it through the application process and receive a recommendation from the commissioner and are not vetoed by the State Board of Education. So essentially, if you apply and you make it through, you receive CSP, which is why we now have the charter school program grant questions embedded in the application, as well as in the budget and the financial plan workbook too. So there is one kind of caveat to this that I want to flag for everyone. If you're affiliated with or proposing to contract with a charter management organization, you as the applicant will have to disclose if the charter management organization does not currently receive or will not receive CSP funds directly from the USDE. So USDOE, the Department of Education, has their own separate charter school program grant for CMOs. And so we just want to make sure that you're not receiving funding already from the charter school program grant from that mechanism. And then you'll tell us if the CMO currently receives CSP funds directly from USDOE, or it will receive CSP funds directly from the USDOE. Basically, you can't double dip is the kind of behind this, right? And then just as a clarification, John has already talked to this, but a charter management organization is a nonprofit organization that operates and manages a network of charter schools linked by centralized support, operations, and oversight. And so you'll let us know whether or not you are proposing to contract with a CMO or you're not proposing to contract with a CMO through your application as well. So if you are affiliated with or proposing to contract with a CMO that currently receives or will receive CSP funds directly from the U.S. Department of Education, TEA cannot issue a startup grant award to you, even if your charter school is authorized. So let's talk a little bit about allowable uses of funds. And I think that this is so important because as you're building out your budgets, you're going to want to cost, certain expenses to the CSP funds and use that source of funds to pay for things related to planning and implementation. You really want to make sure that you're paying attention to what is actually allowable. One of the questions that comes up a lot is, can I use CSP for this? And so all of that is answered really in these next sets of slides and making sure that you're taking an extra look at that. So there's two types of activities. There's planning activities and then there's implementation activities. So planning activities are tied to the planning and design of the educational program. So this includes kind of refinement of the desired educational results and methods for measuring progress towards achieving your results, and professional development of teachers and other staff who will work in the school. Implementation activities are tied to the initial implementation of the charter school. So this includes informing the community about the school, acquiring necessary equipment and educational materials and supplies, acquiring or developing curriculum materials, and other initial operational costs that can't be met from state or local sources. So budgeted activities should be tied to the type of activity regardless of when the expenditure occurs. So planning or implementation. And there are allowable costs for each types of, or for each kind of type of activity. So for planning activities, we've got the planning and design of the charter school's educational program, professional development and training for teachers and staff. And we also have special education support is also allowed as well too. So allowable costs for implementation activities include one-time startup equipment purchases necessary to implement a charter school. So this, this could be buying your furniture, so your desks, your chairs, your computers, equipment related to technology, PE and art, as well as playground equipment. And then you could also purchase non-consumable supplies and materials for startup activities. So that means textbooks, library books, reading materials, as well as teaching materials. You can also use funds for costs associated with the installation of the following. So computers, data systems, networks, and telephone systems. So there are also a couple of additional allowable costs for implementation activities that we like to highlight. One is one-time startup costs associated with providing transportation to students to and from the charter school campus. So maybe you choose with your CSP money that you want to buy a bus with those funds. So that is something that's allowable. It's a one-time startup cost. We've got rental or occupancy costs for the school facility up to the first 30 days of the initial implementation phase in preparation for the opening of the charter school campus. And then we've got costs associated with carrying out necessary renovations and minor facilities repairs, excluding construction, to ensure that the new building complies with applicable statutes and regulations. And this is just a really quick flag. These are what the federal government calls non-construction grants. So you cannot build a facility with CSP funds, but you can modify a facility to bring it up to in compliance with code or in compliance with particularly ADA requirements. Those would be considered minor facility repairs to comply with statutes and regulations. So you can also purchase financial management software and training, property insurance to cover equipment purchased with grant funds, and other appropriate non-sustained costs that cannot be supported from other sources. Essentially, if you have a question, it's always best to ask us. The CSP grant is a reimbursement-based grant only, and so you'll have to submit documentation for those expenditures anyway. So you'll actually purchase something, submit documentation, and then we reimburse you for that. Rather than kind of go out on a limb and spend a large amount of money on something and you don't know whether or not you would be reimbursed for it, we always ask everyone to check with us first before you go down that route. So let's talk a little bit about allowable costs related to payroll, because this comes up a lot. So teacher, school leader, and specialized instructional support personnel salaries limited during the planning phase for planning activities, all right, and up to the first 30 days of the initial implementation phase. This starts, and the initial implementation phase starts the day the charter school campus begins to serve students, provided that these expenses are associated with planning activities or implementation activities, as opposed to kind of ongoing operations. So this means that school leader who is involved in the planning, you could pay that salary. If you have teachers that are involved in the planning, you could pay that salary. What it doesn't mean is someone who is an operations staff person, they're not really necessarily connected to the planning of the instructional design of the school. So you have to be really careful around which salaries you can use when it comes to payroll and allowable costs. So here's and this just adds additional clarification to that, right? So if personnel split their time between ongoing operational activities and planning or implementation activities, only the portion of the time associated with conducting the planning or implementation activities is allowable as a operational cost. So the charter school campus has to maintain time and effort records to document the amount of time that an employee would spend related to planning and implementation. So let's talk about what's unallowable. You can't use this money to pay for field trips. You can't use it to host or sponsor conferences or any advisory councils. You can't use it for any kind of membership in any civic or community organization. And that includes the Charter School Association membership. You can't use it for that. Salaries or contracted personnel beyond the first 30 days of the initial implementation phase of the charter school. And then you can't use it for any debt service or any lease to purchase. You can't use it for rental or occupancy costs beyond the first 30 days of the initial implementation phase. You can't use it to purchase or lease land or real estate. You can't use it to for any kind of construction beyond what we already talked about and kind of those minor adjustments. You can't use it for consumable instructional or other supplies and materials. So you can't use it for like workbooks, etc. And then you can't use it for accounting or bookkeeping services, except to purchase with accounting software. So you can't pay for the services, but you can buy the software for someone, you know, in your charter school, in your operations team to use. You can't use it to pay for your annual audit. You can't use it to pay for ongoing food service. You can't use it to pay for property or liability insurance or interest on loans. You can't pay any deposits of any kind, like a security deposit or a service deposit. You can't use it for religious instruction materials or insignia. And you can't use it for extracurricular activities such as UIL competitions or athletic programs that are not part of state required PE. So let's talk about the items that are actually in the application. So the qualified opportunity zones, we'll talk about that. And then there's some components in the application narrative that address statutory requirements from the U.S. Department of Education. And then we have some program requirements of our own that we require as well. And then there's 2 attachments that address the CSP as well too. So qualified opportunity zone. So if the applicant, you're proposing to open in a qualified opportunity zone, you will receive a priority point for applicants who are committed to serving students who would otherwise attend a school located in the zone. And then if you're awarded a charter, applicants committed to opening those charter schools are going to be required to provide specific census tract numbers and other information on how you plan to serve students in these high need areas. Now, in the narrative, each of the items that we're going to talk about has to be answered pursuant to ESSA, or the Every Student Succeeds Act, that addresses the Charter Schools Program grant. So on page 13, in roles and responsibilities, these are the actual questions from the application. You have to describe the roles and responsibilities of the sponsoring entity, any partner organizations, and charter management organizations as applicable, including the administrative and contractual roles and responsibilities of such partners. And so the reason that this is in there is because in the application, and this specific language is this is a requirement that the U.S. Department of Ed has of everyone who is asking for CSP sub-grantees to fill out an application. On page 19, you'll see questions around community engagement. So describe how the board and applicant team have assessed and built parent and community demand for the proposed school. Discuss the specific outreach strategies that were used. And you'll also see the question around describing plans to support the ongoing use of effective parent, family, and community engagement and solicitation strategies to implement and operate the proposed charter school. So not only is this something that we want to know in terms of how you're building community engagement with your applicants, the U.S. Department of Education wants to know that of the CSP grantees as well. And then on page 21, student transportation plan. So we want to know the plan for meeting the transportation needs of all students at the proposed school. And on page 22, there is a question around the proposed use of funds. So you're actually going to have to describe out your planned activities and expenditures of the grant funds to open and prepare for the operation of the proposed charter school. And then this content that you write in here should match what you put in your budget and your financial plan workbook. They should be similar and there should be coherence across both of those. On page 22, you're going to describe how you'll maintain financial sustainability after the end of the grant period. And then on page 14, we have student outcome goals and progress measures. So you'll have to identify 3 to 5 specific student outcome SMART goals that are specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time bound that will be achieved by the beginning of year 3 of operation of your school, which would be August 2026. And lastly, we've got 2 attachments that are part of kind of our addendum related to the startup grant. And the first one is the CMO receipt of funds. And so are you working with a CMO that is currently receiving or will receive a CSP grant? So really to help us determine whether or not you're eligible for these funds or not. And if you're not eligible for the funds, let's say you are working with a CMO that's already received CSP funds to grow a campus, possibly in Texas, you would not include those funds in your budget, right? Because you're not eligible to receive them from TEA. And then on the second amendment, the equitable access and participation. So you'd have to check any boxes to indicate whether any barriers are foreseeable to equitable access and participation for any groups that receive services funded by this federal grant. So now we've got time for questions related to CSP. So go ahead and use the Q&A feature if you have them. The question that's come in is, what are some drawbacks to partnering with a CMO? And so that's not specifically related to the CSP grant. Charter organizations choose to partner with charter management organizations for a number of reasons, whether that is a desire to partner with somebody who has experience running a school. Maybe they partner with them for certain services. And there are a number of reasons that a charter might do that. One reason might be to replicate a successful model here in Texas, maybe from an organization that hasn't operated here before. So there's a variety of reasons that an entity might choose to partner with a charter management organization. Question, did you say that the CSP grant cannot be used to build a school building? That is correct. The CSP grant is not a construction grant. So you cannot purchase a facility with it and you cannot build a building with it. You can only make modifications to bring a building up to statute or code. Yeah, so great question that we've got. So do all schools that are approved receive a grant automatically? How much is the grant and how is the grant amount determined? So the amount is determined by what we put in our application to the US Department of Education. And so the amount is $900,000. Everyone who applies for a charter that is recommended and then not vetoed by the SBOE receives the grant unless they are partnering with a CMO that has already received funding from USDOE on the CMO CSP grant. So we had one applicant who was approved last year and not vetoed by SBOE, and that applicant group automatically received the CSP. We've worked with the US Department of Education that our process is so rigorous that we're not conducting a second evaluation process. So as you're building your budget, recommend that you come back to these questions over time and the allowable and unallowable costs. You'll see, and I know that Joe talked about earlier about trying to figure out how do we make our budget work. And I think ultimately one kind of good tip is to start with, okay, what can we use CSP for? Should we go ahead and spend that out first in our budget before we start planning to use any of the other funds that are generated? So how is the grant paid out? Is it all at once or over multiple years? So it's really up to you and to decide what you want to use it for in terms of planning or implementation activities. And so we see charters that sometimes decide that they're going to spend it all in their startup year and maybe in year one, or they're going to kind of stretch it out over year 1 to 2. It's really up to the applicant and what works best for them. We typically have a grant period of 2 years that you have to use the funds, but that can often be extended if necessary. We find that the amount of money is so small, and you're going to laugh and say $900,000 is small, but we find that amount of money that charter schools have no problem using that up in year 0 and year 1 completely. Our questions seem to have slowed. If you think of questions as they come up, please, as you're working on your application, just like you would in any other area, feel free to submit a question into our inbox, and we will get you an answer kind of, as Natalie said, related to the specifics of the process or allowable uses of funds in that way. So we're really excited about the CSP grant and the way that we've structured it. It allows our new schools to know that they're going to have those dollars and have and be able to count on them to help support and make sure that they're able to launch their schools as strongly as possible. And I'll turn it back over to you, John.
Thank you, Marion. Looks like we're a bit ahead of schedule, so let's take a slightly longer break than a cell phone break. So let's just go ahead and give you all 10 minutes. We'll be back here at 12:16. 12:16, we'll see you back.
Actually, I think we're at 12:16, so I am going to go ahead and get it started. I cannot seem to share my video, but as long as everyone can hear me, I think we're okay. Without further ado, here we go, start my video. There we are. All right. So without further ado, I'm going to jump into this presentation. It is on special education requirements and things that we think you should probably know as you gear up for your application. Let's start this off formally. I am going to say greetings and thank you for joining us today. My name is Dr. Scarlett Pappas. I manage all of the special education monitoring in charters and virtual schools. I am also joined by Morgan Phillips Hubbard, who will be monitoring the chat and helping me present some of this information. Please feel free to submit questions and we'll take pauses along the way to answer them. The other thing that I've been conscious of doing is embedding a lot of links for the information. I don't like to have a lot of content that is heavy in words on the slide deck. So please don't worry about the taking notes. We will give you the resources to get any of the information I share today, okay? Together, we are committed to high expectations and systems that achieve equitable outcomes for every student with a disability. We have 3 primary objectives for today. We want to share some relevant data. We'll also walk through our process for monitoring special education services, and we'll give you a brief overview of some frequently asked questions that we entertain regularly. We also like to start by thinking about the children we represent in the mission of the Texas Education Agency. So, of course, this number is constantly changing, but we have over 5 million students that are receiving free and public education in Texas, and we want to prepare them all for success in college, a career, or the military. As we drill down on that number, we have approximately 11% of students in Texas receiving special education services. I also want to recognize that 20% of students are identified as emergent bilingual. About 8% are gifted and talented, and 7% are provided 504 services. Today, though, we're really going to limit the conversation specifically to talk about special education services. What you're looking at on this slide are the 13 eligibility categories that are recognized by IDEA, the Individuals with Disability Education Act. The big takeaway here is that about 1/3 of students with disabilities are students with specific learning disabilities. We also refer to these as oftentimes invisible disabilities. However, I really want to point out that there are these 13 categories, and when you're planning for your special education scenario, special education services, I really encourage you to go through some scenario planning for each of these disabilities and some of the needs that you can anticipate these students having. Again, we have just some data here that is a little bit lag in timeline, but we like to rely on the most recent snapshot data. Our department knows that we have a little more than 179 charter districts, and we always want to think about how many students, teachers, and campuses these charters actually represent, because while our percentiles look like it's a small representation, it's really not. There are a lot of people that are impacted by the decisions that we make. Okay, did we have any questions or chats that came through while I was presenting any of that data? All right, easy peasy so far. Okay, so we will dive right into our differentiated monitoring and support. John, I'm going to ask a quick question. I want to make sure that my screen is presenting because I see you highlighted in green, and I just realized that my green box around what I usually see as presenting is not presenting. Can I get a confirmation?
It appears as if you're presenting.
Okay, fantastic. That's all I needed to know, is that this is a Zoom oddity. We're good. Thank you. All right. So the Department of Review and Support at the TEA strives to improve special education services for special education monitoring for all of our local education agencies. The Differentiated Monitoring and Support, or DMS system as we call it, is a process that is designed to assist LEAs in improving services and facilitating positive student outcomes. The Differentiated Monitoring and Support System, it really consists of two special education program monitoring pathways. The first one is our targeted support reviews, and our second one is our cyclical reviews. What I want to do is just highlight these very broadly. Again, these are things that we will tell you about when you're engaging in the monitoring system. So we're going to keep it kind of high level here. Both monitoring pathways analyze data related to federal and state compliance. Both cyclical and targeted monitoring pathways have a lot of activities that are completed through a desk review. That is where we look at student-specific information. In some cases, an LEA might also engage in an on-site review. And all LEAs will complete a self-assessment at the local level each year to support the development of an improvement plan to support the continuous improvement of special education programming for students with disabilities. Every local education agency or LEA in the state participates in a cyclical review over a 6-year rotating schedule. Cyclical reviews are intended to provide a comprehensive analysis of the LEA special education program. It does include a review of the LEA special education policies and procedures. Each cycle is referred to as a school year. So this coming year will be in cycle 4, but what we know to be true is that this upcoming school year is the 2022-2023 school year. So each of these cycles are in groups. Our first group, or what we affectionately refer to as group 1, will run from October to December. Our group 2 will be in January through March, and group 3 will be April through June. Ooh, I'm not nervous about them at all. The cyclical monitoring schedules are published on the TEA website in 2-year increments. LEAs participating in the cyclical monitoring will receive correspondence from the TEA at the start of the school year and throughout the monitoring process. Linked along the bottom of this slide are actual reviews that you can click on and look at the public link to them. We have to post them. And so you will have that accessible to you. Most LEAs start preparing for a cyclical review about a year before we engage with them. However, the thing that I really want to tell applicants, and I really want to send this message to all LEAs, this should be how your system runs continuously. There should be no preparation for a cyclical review. It should just be business as usual. So there is no heavy lift. We do not want to disrupt your organization any more than we need to. All right, I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this slide because I want to kind of define what each one of these activities are. So monitoring activities range from an LEA only participating in a self-assessment based on that RDA framework, all the way down to needing to have an on-site review that we conduct. So let's start at the top and talk about that self-assessment. The purpose of the self-assessment is to assist LEA leadership teams in evaluating and improving their educational programs serving special education students and other populations. The special education self-assessment is completed annually by every single one of the LEAs, and it will begin for applicants that are approved in their year 1. That is regardless of the RDA framework determination level, and it's intended to engage leadership teams in proactively addressing any special education compliance activities, but also really geared towards quality and improving student performance. The strategic support plan, the purpose of that is again, it's an annual review. It's a guide. It really is intended to guide LEAs through the process of prioritizing areas for improvement and developing a plan to improve outcomes specific for students with disabilities. That plan can also be used to work on performance metrics for students who are emergent bilingual, students who are homeless, students who are in foster care, or students who are military connected. So again, we are part of the Office of Special Populations. I'm just presenting really specifically today on special education. Dyslexia monitoring. Dyslexia monitoring is a process that ensures LEAs comply with federal and state dyslexia requirements through a review of those procedures and artifacts of implementation. One thing that I want to note about the dyslexia monitoring is that this is primarily a part of the cyclical monitoring process. So that's when you can anticipate that happening, is whenever you're assigned to a cycle or a year. The Desk reviews. Desk reviews aim to ensure that LEA compliance with federal and state special education requirements are reflected not only in the policies, but in individual student records. Lastly, our on-site reviews. The on-site review aims to thoroughly examine multiple measures related to federal compliance and improving student outcomes. In preparation for an on-site review, the review and support team will conduct a desk review prior to going physically on-site. That is with exception to your first year being open. But we also desire an opportunity to collaborate with the LEA leadership team. When the LEA is scheduled for an on-site visit, we do give you advance notification. And we really like to make sure that we are meeting needs that you guys have identified in any of your strategic support plans. We want this to be a purposeful benefit to the LEAs. When we do the targeted support visits, that is usually broken down based on determination level and sometimes significant disproportionality. So the support schedule, when we are talking about the targeted reviews and you are engaging in any part of this process for that, is really broken down into a few touch points during the year. So anybody who has a determination level of meets requirements, they don't have any real touch points with us unless they reach out to us. However, if there is an LEA that has a determination level as needs assistance, we're going to reach out to them about every 90 days to see how their strategic support plan is being implemented and see if they need any technical assistance. For our LEAs that have a determination level of needs intervention, that would be that DL3. We are going to have a teleconference and meet to talk about the progress of that SSP or strategic support plan every 60 days. And for any LEAs that have a rating of needs substantial intervention, we're going to have a monthly cadence for meeting for those LEAs. I see questions are popping up. So when we get to that next break, I promise I will answer them. We do expect all new charter schools to have services ready to implement on the first day that you open the doors to your new wonderful students. So we do visit in year one with the Charter Authorizing and Administration Department to review the operations and recommend considerations. The purpose of that year one visit is to be proactive. We do not pull student folders or review them or request any student-specific documents during that first year. However, we will schedule a cyclical review before that 5-year renewal. That's when that more comprehensive review takes place. And again, we do share those findings with the Charter Authorizing and Administration Department. The year one focuses on the systemic processes in place to support special education. We know these systems are likely to change as they're implemented in a new school setting. Therefore, during that year one site visit, when we join the charter authorizing team, what we're really doing is ensuring that there are structures in place to meet these categories and also provide feedback so that you're ready for that continuous improvement process. You can read for yourselves, but those high level areas that we are looking for, we want to make sure that there are child find procedures. We need to know that there is a plan for professional development that is going to support teachers and staff in providing special education services. We need to know that there are self-monitoring activities that are happening internally in your agency so that you guys know that you are compliant. And then we also need to check the staffing supports for each student. So we'll need to know that teachers are certified for special education and any service providers. We'll go into that on the frequently asked questions too. This particular slide is one that I share, and you will see it again. This is just to be a little more transparent on what we're looking for in that year one visit. So these are new requirements for charters in their first year of operation. And this process does not include a desk review or any of that specific information. Remember, I just want to know that you have something in place. What we look for is statutorily required for operation. So as you look at this column of required items, these are those things that when we are on site, we need to know that these things have taken place, that they are implemented. Anything on the other side, these are things that we love to see. This is stuff that really supports these things. So I would think of this as your base and things that you strive to make sure that you have available. And I can highlight each one of these as time permits, but for the sake of time, I'm going to go ahead and move along. As you've probably learned, a charter must petition for renewal 5 years after the charter is first awarded, and then every 10 years thereafter. That process must consider the charter school's academic and financial performance. Based on the charter school's performance, it will be placed into one of those 3 renewal categories. One is expedited, in which case it's renewed. There is an expiration for closure. And then there is that third category of discretionary, where it becomes a consideration of renewal or denial. So I want to talk about how we engage in that process a little bit. The charter portfolio manager actually reaches out to us to help provide some of that information about special populations determination ratings, significant disproportionality, anything that has come up in non-compliance over the last 3 years. And then we also look at any substantiated complaints that have come through. So specifically, we share a historical profile of data for special education. In addition, we include information from those RDA reports and any of our findings related to those monitoring activities that came from the cyclical or targeted review process. This slide shows the specific breakdown of some of the information that we provide the charter authorizing team during that renewal for charter schools. Okay, let me pause to take time out for some of those questions. Morgan, can you let me know what some of those were?
Yes, the first question was related to reviews conducted in Spanish.
Oh, okay. Yeah, yes, they have to be in the student's native language. I don't know the context of the question, but yes, if the student's native language is Spanish and the parent participating is participating in Spanish, then yes, you would conduct that meeting in Spanish.
The next question was, can a new charter school be rated DL1, or how is that determined for a new school?
Okay, so you will not have a determination rating on the day that your doors open because there is no data. Your determination level will actually be given to you after your students take the STAR report. So those RDA reports typically come out in October, and that is when you will get that determination level.
Is it possible to specialize your school to focus on some of the special ed categories and not all of them?
No, that would be discrimination. No.
That is it, ma'am.
Okay, thank you so much. I appreciate that. I am going to jump into the frequently asked questions. And I think we're running pretty good on time, so please don't hesitate to ask questions. Okay, so who supports special populations of students? Well, supporting special populations of students is absolutely everyone's responsibility. The special education requirements are federal, so these requirements that we're talking about, they are the same for all LEAs. There's no differentiation between a charter and an ISD. So let's walk through what some of those things are. First and foremost, admissions cannot be denied because a student has an individual education plan or a specific identified disability. So that goes to that question that we just answered live. Child find requirements are the same and must be reported every year. All requirements for academic, functional, and related services must be described and implemented in the IEP. LRE is an acronym that we use a lot. It stands for least restrictive environment. We're gonna have a few slides that talk about least restrictive environment. We'll talk about it as we go more through the deck, but it is a big consideration that you should have as you prepare your application. Lastly, let me activate that bubble. Lastly, you must have certified special education staff to conduct any evaluations, oversee the implementation of accommodations by an instructional assistant, or implement modifications to the curriculum. This is one of my favorite things that we have implemented at the agency. I think of the self-assessment as a guidepost. What we are asking you to do is identify the strengths and weaknesses of your special education program. So this graphic shows each area an LEA would consider in a systemic review of your entire special education program. The blue represents 7 prioritized areas. However, compliance items are required for all 23 for you to complete. And that really represents a comprehensive review or needs assessment of your LEA. And all of these areas align with the DMS domains of implementation, student outcomes, and family engagement to assist LEAs in focusing on systemic improvement, to be inclusive and compliant, and provide the best practices to improve services and supports for students with disabilities. Okay, this one. Want to consider a lot of charter LEAs contract for support services, and that's fine. But please consider who will complete those evaluations carefully and ensure they meet all of the requirements. For example, parental consent is one of the first pieces of an evaluation process. That consent must be signed. That consent must be in the native language that we talked about earlier for the parent. It must also describe the evaluation procedures, and it must ensure that the parent agrees to the evaluation in writing, but understands that it's voluntary and can be revoked at any time. Please also know that the day that school receives that consent, it triggers timelines that you have to comply with. And it's the LEA, it's the charter school that is held responsible for complying with those timelines, not that third party person that was contracted with to do the evaluation. Again, this one, if you have questions about special education staff requirements, this is a federal requirement for special education. I'm going to say go directly to the regulations. I linked them here for you, but all schools have the same requirements for providing special education services. It really doesn't matter whether you're a charter or an ISD. When it comes to special education compliance, IDEA is what we are all, is the umbrella we are all operating under. This is again, I put this in here just to make it explicitly clear. Many charter LEAs do contract with a third-party provider to complete evaluations or provide related services. Related services would be your physical therapy, your occupational therapy, anything of that nature. And please understand that the charter is still responsible for all of that oversight and that compliance. So one of the reasons we have that year one process is to make sure, like I said, you have that systemic oversight. You are saying, okay, here's how I know that my evaluations are being completed on time. IEPs are legally binding. There's a lot of information that must be documented in the IEP. For example, the Admission Review and Dismissal Committee. You often hear them referred to as ARD committees in your school systems. They must make decisions about accommodations, modifications, the frequency and duration of services. They have to consider extended school year services, transition plans, and if there's any additional training that needs to be provided so that staff can meet the needs of the student. All right, present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. That is what a PLAF stands for. You will hear us refer to it as a PLAF and wonder what language we are talking about. But what it means is that the ARD committee must consider multiple factors, including student strengths and academic and non-academic needs in the development of the IEP. Therefore, that PLAF must establish an overall baseline of strengths and needs to determine the annual goals. I could do a whole training specifically on this. We will start that conversation about least restrictive environment now. So students with disabilities must receive services in an environment with non-disabled peers to the maximum extent appropriate. Schools must ensure that the student is not removed from the general education environment unless the nature or severity of the disability is such that the student cannot be educated with supplementary aids or services. I think a lot of people know that part of least restrictive environment. But as we move ahead, I love it when I struggle. There we go. The federal requirements also require every LEA to have what we refer to as a continuum of alternative placements to meet the needs of students with disabilities. So that continuum must include instruction in regular classes or mainstream instruction, special education classes like a resource classroom, self-contained settings. That means that the student is instructed in a way that is separate from those non-disabled peers for more than half of the day. And there also needs to be a plan for providing services to students if placement is required for special school, home instruction, or hospital instruction. So let me do make a couple of clarifying statements here. These are just a few of the instructional arrangements that are recognized in Texas. I also want to clarify that the LEA does not have to have all placements available, on that day one, but the LEA must have a way to make all of those placements available if an ARD committee determines that it is what is most appropriate to meet the needs of a particular student. Okay, much of the information that I have presented to this point can be found in this IEP development guidebook. Links to the digital version for technical assistance are here on this page, and it will be live for you after we share the deck. I truly encourage everyone to provide this particular resource to their teachers and administrators when their school opens, so that they know what is required of them under each of those topics that we covered. Because again, what I'm sharing today is just very high level. It's not getting into the weeds or the details of any of these topics. Another thing that we see is the phrase 504 used interchangeably with special education, or people asking questions about that. The U.S. Department of Education enforces Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. It is a civil rights statute prohibiting discrimination against individuals with disabilities. So Section 504 covers qualified students with disabilities who attend any school receiving federal financial assistance. To be protected under Section 504, a student must be determined to have a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activity. They must also have a record of the impairment and be regarded as having such an impairment. In addition, Section 504 requires that school districts provide a free and public education to qualified students in their jurisdiction with a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more of those life activities. The big difference there is that they are identified as a student with disabilities, not necessarily that they need special education services. So to qualify for special education services, a student must have a disability, just like with 504, but they do need to have special education services. To qualify for the, let me clarify that just a little bit. You have on our structure over here, you have the 13 qualifying disabilities. And then the second prong of this is that as a result of that disability, the student also needs specially designed instruction or special education services or a related service. I like to give tips. I love to make sure that our presentations have lots of links and that we take some time to give you guys some tips. So here are helpful tips to complying with child find requirements. Number one, provide orientation or training to staff. There is documentation and timelines that charters must be able to support. Take an active approach to identify students with a disability. The law states that LEAs may not wait for others to refer students for services or request an evaluation. Review your child find procedures annually. That's a recommendation. It's not statutorily required, but I think that everyone needs to look for opportunities to improve continuously. Generate factors that may trigger a need to refer a student for an evaluation. For example, an LEA may not deny or delay an initial evaluation because previous interventions were not implemented. You can't use MTSS or RTI as a reason not to evaluate. Consider the various needs of students with an identified disability. And what might they need if they are identified in one of those 13 categories? let's see, consider the need for special education services and related services. In Texas, speech and language is an instructional service, but a lot of times people also think of that as a related service. And last but not least, special education services are general education students first. It's also where students are most likely to receive their special education services or those related services. So making sure that there is coordination and collaboration between your curriculum staff and your teachers, it's critical. We're still sticking with child find a little bit. Who can make referrals for special education? That would be your parents, your school, anybody in the school personnel that knows the student, or any person who has what they call an interest in the education or care of a student. So there's a lot of legal ease there for anybody. Here are some last sticking points. Referrals can be made verbally, and they aren't required to be in writing. You can ask for it, but it's not required. LEAs must respond to a request within 15 days. And before an evaluation can begin, the parent must be notified and provided those procedural safeguards. This is a quick look at your timelines related to child find. We've already talked about the 15 days. This one is one that I want to particularly highlight. If someone is requesting a full and individual initial evaluation and you agree to it, federally it is 60 school days after the consent is received. But in Texas, it is only 45 days. So please make note of that. Who attends the ARD? Okay, the ARD committee is responsible for the IEP development and decision-making during any ARD meeting. So IEPs or ARD meetings must occur at least annually and more often as appropriate. As appropriate includes any of these following times. Anytime the student is showing a lack of progress towards those annual goals, if reevaluation results need to be shared with the family, if an eligibility determination is changing or needs to be considered, or any other matter to meet the needs of that student. What you see here are people who are required in all ARD meetings. That purple representation are other people that may attend the meeting or may even be required in certain circumstances or situations. So again, we're trying to present a lot of high-level information here, but there is a lot of what I refer to as oh, by the way information. So you're going to want to dig into those links, or you are going to want to make sure that you have someone on staff who really knows special education inside and out. Specially defined instruction is a very fancy term that means adapting the content, methodology, or delivery of instruction to address the student's unique needs and ensure that the student has access to the general education curriculum. Transportation. Transportation is a related service in special education. Therefore, if the ARD committee determines that the student will require transportation to meet the needs of services described in the IEP, then the LEA has a responsibility to provide that transportation. And we are down to my last two slides, and this is where all the goodies live. So we have fantastic education service centers in Texas. Some of the materials that have been published by them or internally by the Texas Education Agency are linked here for you. One of those I've already shared. Some of the other information that I presented came from these other resources. And then last but not least, I only have 2 pictures here of our fantastic networks, but we do have a lot of, I think it's 10 state technical assistance networks. And so there's one link down at the bottom that will take you to the list of all of them. When you need information about special education or special education services, please don't hesitate to hand out, to reach out to any of them or any of the 3 of us that are your representatives as the charter team for special education. I want to thank everyone for their time today and allow the rest of this time for any follow-up questions. What can I answer for people?
There's a question in the chat. How do you distinguish between a student needing 504 or SPED services? Okay,
I am going to again say, please dig into your child find resources here. A big part of that identification process is going to be determining the severity, determining number 1, the first prong of does the student qualify as a student with disability, and then the second prong of that is going to be, do they require specially designed services to be able to meet the needs of the student educationally. So you're really going to rely on the data that a licensed school psychologist can provide you in making that decision. I feel like I ran through a whole bunch of information really quickly. I want to answer another question that kind of live that I see coming through. I am not saying that you must contract with anyone. What I'm saying is that I see that many people do. Some schools do hire someone locally, but you have to have a way of providing these services. Thank you. I have a note that it's a great presentation. I always like feedback like that. Okay, I also want to say that I did stick very closely to a script today, so that the same information will be presented next week. Thank you all for your time today. Please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions in the future.
Thank you, Scarlett. Thank you, Morgan. Before our next presentation, I thought this would be a good opportunity to show you all something, and we'll provide a follow-up email, one of our many follow-up emails throughout this process to remind you of this, but I just want to show you. If you go to the State Board of Education website, okay, and go here to live and archived broadcasts, past meetings. So if you scroll down, you will find all of the, let me see, here we go. So the charter applicant interviews. You can watch the archived footage of those interviews. And I mentioned this because as Scarlett was saying, it's a lot of information. And a lot of times these interviews serve as a way to have applicants talk about outstanding issues or points of clarity. So I think it's a good exercise to watch some of these interviews to see, especially with regards to special populations, special education, kind of what those common questions are where applicants seem to either miss things or need more clarity or provide more clarity on. I think it's a good time to look at that now as you develop your application to maybe avoid those particular questions within the interview, you know, should you proceed. So just a kind of a pro tip for you all. With that said, Leslie, do you want to come on and get ready? Leslie's here to talk to you all about high quality instructional materials. Hi, Leslie.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Okay, I'm going to start sharing my screen. So hopefully I'm sharing correctly. John, can you let me know?
I will.
Okay, give me 1 second. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can. You were presenting.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So I'll go ahead and jump in. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for attending the session today on high quality instructional materials. My name is Leslie Cuellar, and I am the High Quality Instructional Materials Recruiting Lead here at TEA. My email here is down here below. So after the presentation today, if you have any questions, you can just shoot me an email at this email address. So the agenda for today is I'm briefly going to talk about what are high quality instructional materials and what are open education resources. I'll then go into providing some information on the research behind HQIM via a report that was released, I believe, in 2018 called the Opportunity Myth. I'll then go into an overview of the Texas Resource Review, or also known as TRR, and then just quickly give you some information on how you can learn more. So to start off, what are high quality instructional materials? So to begin with, we often refer to high quality instructional materials as HQIM. So you'll notice me saying HQIM throughout the rest of the presentation. So I'm just referring to high quality instructional materials here. So before we jump into a conversation about HQIM, I want to make clear that just having the right tools does not automatically result in effective instruction. There is a combination of strategic factors that, when combined, promote effective instruction and increase student achievement. So this afternoon, I'm going to focus on HQIM because I believe that it should be the base of what is provided for and to all students and educators here in Texas. Districts and schools are already spending money on this factor, and high quality is not more expensive than low quality. So it's important to highlight that HQIM includes much more beyond just a scope and sequence and/or assessments. They also include teacher and student resources that are aligned to the scope and sequence as well. So a full set of HQIM includes, at a minimum, course level materials like a scope and sequence, pacing guides and family supports, teacher facing unit materials that include unit plans and summative assessments, teacher facing lesson materials, including daily lesson plans that cover a full school year and all lesson materials, as well as student facing materials such as student workbooks that are aligned to teacher lesson plans, readers, and all other materials. So this full set of materials also covers 100% of the TEKS. One helpful note on terminology is that in Texas, we actually use the term curriculum to refer specifically to the scope and sequence document organized by unit. So however, when we say HQIM, we are referring to that scope and sequence document in addition to the teacher and student facing resources that are aligned to the adopted curriculum. And so with that in mind, we formally defined HQIM as materials that, 1, ensure full coverage of the TEKS, 2, are aligned to evidence-based practices in the relevant content area, 3, they support all learners, including students with disabilities, English learners, and students identified as gifted and talented. They also enable frequent progress monitoring that through embedded and aligned assessments. And lastly, they include implementation supports for teachers that include teacher and student facing lesson level materials. So now I'm going to jump into the opportunity myth. So in 2018, the organization TNTP followed about 4,000 students across 5 diverse school systems to better understand their experiences in the classroom. So TNTP sought to see if students doing well in school and showing up doing the work and meeting teachers' expectations was enough to prepare them for their futures. And what they found couldn't have been further from true. So in following these students, TNTP found that students were able to master the content that was put in front of them, and they were in many cases showing up to do the work. But the content they were faced with was vastly below their grade level and below rigor. So they weren't given a real chance or an opportunity to grapple with on-level challenging materials. So I'm just going to take a minute and let you all take a screenshot with your cell phones if you have it handy. If you scan this QR code, there is this executive summary. It's about 8 pages of the opportunity myth. I won't have time to review all of it, so I do urge you all to look at this site, reread this executive summary on your own time. And over the next 10 minutes or so, I'm going to do a quick summary of this report and why it's so important to grapple with. So through this study, it was evident that students have big, clear plans and dreams. About 94% of students surveyed aspired to attend college. So the vast majority of the students are aspiring to college, go to college, they're aspiring for careers that require them to attain a college degree. So in the 1,000+ assignments that were observed, 88% of those assignments were relevant to what students were learning in class. And of those, students were able to succeed on 71% of them. So here students were consistently doing what they were asked and succeeding on those assignments. The real problem here lied within the fact that those same students who were on task and meeting the expectations of the assignments put in front of them were only meeting grade level standards 17% of the time. So this assignments that they were asked to complete in almost all cases were far below grade level. And so while on average, the assignments observed were below grade level, this varied greatly by classroom. Some students were able to grapple with high quality assignments like this eighth grade language arts class here on the screen, where students were reading a mighty long way. And they also wrote an informational survey that analyzed, where they were given the opportunity to analyze historical events and had the opportunity to fully meet the depth of multiple standards and learn relevant content. And so while some students did have access to that strong instruction and assignments, most students spent time on low quality assignments. So TNTP observed another 8th grade language arts classroom just down the street from this previous example that I shared, where the students were reading a complex text and they were writing an informational essay based on that text. These students were asked to read a short 5th grade level passage and complete multiple choice questions about vocabulary and filling in the missing vowels of the word. So this specific task is not aligned to any 8th grade literacy standard. So of all of the classrooms TNTP observed, the overwhelming majority of the time throughout the year was spent on assignments that were not grade appropriate. Only a small portion of the year is spent on assignments that were grade appropriate and gave students the opportunity to be challenged with grade level and rigorous content. And likewise, TNTP also observed the classroom instruction and found that, again, here, the overwhelming majority of classroom hours were spent on lessons with weak instruction, where students weren't doing the majority of the thinking. And only 29 hours out of that school year, students were exposed to lessons with strong instruction. So the opportunity myth research found, and this is the main takeaway here, over the 180 classroom hours in each core subject, this leads to significant wasted time spent on assignments with weak instruction where students are not thinking about the grade level content. And these results are profound, but the problem is actually much, much worse for students of color, those from low income families, emergent bilingual students, and students with mild to moderate disabilities. So this research found that approximately 40% of classrooms with a majority of students of color never received a single grade level assignment. And this is the statistics on this was notably lower when looking at classrooms with mostly white students. And so I want to highlight here, while these findings are hard to grapple with as educators, TNTP also uncovered what students with high access to opportunity looks like and what resources they need to access to. So they found here that students need consistent opportunities to work on grade appropriate assignments. They need strong instruction where students do most of the thinking in the lesson. They need deep engagement in what they are learning and for it to be relevant. And lastly, they need teachers who hold high expectations for students and believe they can meet grade level standards. Here, across all demographic groups, students grew more when they had access to our to 4 resources. They saw marked improvements across all 4 of those domains, and notably when they were more engaged in class and had teachers that held high expectations for their students. And so the only thing I want to note here is that the numbers calculated here were calculated by building value added models and then using the standard Credo conversion to generate the months of learning statistics that you see here. Also, this is especially true for students who, sorry. All right, I might have missed a slide, but I just want to jump into here. So this is especially true for students who are below grade level. Students who started the year behind grew significantly more when they had access to grade appropriate assignments. And they had strong instruction, deep engagement, and they had teachers who had high expectations of them. So this flies in the face of this implicit narrative that we sometimes see where, you know, that students, they can't do grade level work, right? So it also challenges what we see. Oh, sorry. What we see here is that if students who are behind don't have access to grade appropriate assignments, they never have the chance to catch up. And so instead, teachers need stronger support and training to give students real access to challenging content, regardless of the starting point. And so now I'm going to jump into, or you might be asking, what does HQM do to help prevent the opportunity myth for students? And so here, the reality in most classrooms is that teachers are left to their own devices to find instructional materials. And there is one study in 2021 from the American Instructional Resources that found that the top 10 most selected additional materials were self-created resources, were from teachers, paid teachers, or they were found on YouTube. Another study in 2016 found that teachers on average spend about 7 hours per week or about 250 hours per year developing and finding their own instructional materials. That's a whole extra workday just to find what they are teaching their kids each week. And so of those who did create or select their own materials, the overwhelming majority found that those materials the overwhelming majority found those materials on Google or Pinterest. And many of us have probably done that same thing, right? So this practice gives students a vastly different classroom experience. It burns teachers out, and most school systems don't even provide enough planning time for teachers to intentionally select or create high quality materials aligned to the standards. So this same survey reported that teachers are only given about 3 hours and 45 minutes per week for planning time. And so here are some of the main takeaways from this. So HQM provides equitable access with strong instruction to students through one, providing consistent and daily exposure to rigorous grade level content to all students. Two, allows all students to access the same materials across classrooms and local education agency. And three, it streamlines data collected from formative and summative assessments to better understand where students are at. And so the only thing I want to highlight here is that HQIM helps alleviate the burden of teachers and allows them to become more focused and intentional in their practice. So as you can see here on the left side of the screen, without HQIM, teachers are doing more to prepare and implement a curriculum compared to those who are using an HQIM already. And so now I'm going to jump into open education resources. So here at TEA, we have a team devoted to creating open education resources that are high quality instructional materials. And so you might be asking, what are open education resources? Here at the agency, we say OER. So to review on the slide, this is the legislative language that enables and codifies OER at the Texas Administrative Code, or which is also known as the state statute, or I think the Texas Education Code. And so I'm just going to highlight a few of the high points that are bolded here on the screen. So OER means teaching, learning, and research resources that reside in a public domain. They allow for free use, reuse, modification, and sharing with others, and are used to support access to knowledge. Here, there are a number of challenges in the field that our work is seeking to address. And so here on the left side, you see some of the current problems, and on the right, we have what are solutions from OER. So just to go through them one by one, one of the most common challenges is the research showing that 83% of assignments provided to students are below grade level. And for OER, our goal is to ensure that there's access to grade level texts and assignments every day for all students. Another problem is that many materials that cover the TEKS are not aligned to the research on how kids learn. And so our solution is that we offer products that are TEKS aligned and that are designed based on research on how kids learn. Another problem, many districts purchase copyright materials that cannot be customized to local context. And so our solution with OER is districts can download and edit all OER products so that they can customize them to their local context. Another current problem, many districts don't provide comprehensive resources that leave teachers to find or create materials. And so our solution with OER is that we include comprehensive resources that provide teachers with everything they need to cover 100% of the TEKS. And lastly, most instructional materials don't have a path for continuous improvement. And so OER, here at OER, with our OER, we're constantly conducting focus groups with text educators and getting their feedback to help inform the development of our products. And so here on this slide is just a snapshot of the suite of OER products that include, as you can see, Eureka Math and Zern for Math K through 5. We also offer Carnegie Learning TEKS Math Solutions for Math 6 through 12. Here you'll see Amplify Texas Elementary Literacy Program, both offered in English and Spanish for RLA K through 2. We have Amplify as well in English and Spanish for K through 5. For RLA 6 through 8, we offer Amplify Texas ELAR, and we're also working on a forthcoming title that should be released and ready for school year 24-25. We also have Odell Education for RLA 9 through 12. For Science K through 5, we have PhD Science TEKS Edition, which I believe there is a print restriction, and we're also we will not be doing continuous improvement starting school year 23-24. We also, however, we also do have a new product that is coming and hopefully will be available in school year 24-25. And then we do have some other forthcoming titles for both social studies K5 and an integrative K5 product, which as you can see here will hopefully be available for social studies starting in 23-24, and then hopefully for the integrated K5 product, it should be available in school year 25-26. And then lastly, this is my favorite grade band, is pre-K. So we have teaching strategies, and we're also working on a new product, and the title is forthcoming, and hopefully that should be ready for this 23-24 school year. And so here we just have a link here that are available on our TEA available materials website. And so here is just the OER development process at a glance. And so as you see here, our first step here is first to procure materials. And so all products are selected through a competitive solicitation. They then go through an initial review and an emergency public release. So this process consists of a third-party quality review and also Texas teacher and stakeholder focus groups. And then the important thing that I want to note here that's highlighted in orange is that Texas educators are deeply involved in the work to procure, review, and improve these materials. And then lastly, the OER products go through continuous improvement cycle where we do publish this. We have an annual release each January so that schools can prepare for the next coming school year. And so next, I'm going to jump into the Texas Resource Review. So the overall goal of the Texas Resource Review, which is also known as the TRR, is to support districts with a selection of HQIM. And here the TRR is designed to provide comprehensive and user-friendly information about the quality of instructional materials. And so here is how the process works. And so first we have instructional materials are submitted for a quality review. They then go through State Board of Education TEKS coverage process, which determines which standards are met. And also they also go through a quality review process for, they also go through a quality review process where reviewers collect evidence to determine how well standards are being met. And then lastly, we publish these sort of clear and transparent user-friendly results that are published on our TRR website. And so on our texasresourcereview.org website, you can find rubrics and reports that are categorized by content area and grade level. And so the rubrics here show all of the criteria that reviewers consider when reviewing a product. And you are also able to access all rubrics and do your own process. For the reports that are available, they provide detailed findings and evidence for each of the instructional materials. And then you can also review and compare reports for different materials that you're interested in procuring. And so on this slide here, you just see a snapshot of what a pre-K systems rubric might look like. And so here, reviewers will navigate through a rubric like this and based on the categories shown on the screen, and then they focus on each category to evaluate the quality of instructional materials. And so here on this is just a snapshot of the TRR website. And so rubrics can be easily downloaded by visiting the TRR website and using the drop down below here. It says about TRR. And then for viewing TRR reports, the TRR website provides information on various ways that you can support local selection teams in their process. So when you first bring up the reports, you see a view here in which the selection scores are visible for the products. And then you can see, or you can jump into the details for each of those products by clicking on the view reports. I'm sorry, I see like the little circles, not where it needs to be. And so I'm going to go ahead and jump into, I think this might be one of our last slides. So within each quality review report, you can see the drop down to see how well their products are being met, partially met, or did not meet the indicators. So from there, the evidence that was collected that resulted in the determination of the score. And the level of and I think that brings us to a close there. Sorry, y'all. It was just 1 or 2 slides away from showing you all. So the only other information that I was going to share was our TRR website. So if you do go to texasresourcereview.org, you can learn more about all the reports and rubrics that we have available for y'all to review. So I'll turn it over to you, John.
I was on mute. Sorry. I think we have some questions. Let's see, Natalie, did you want to jump on? There we go.
Yes, sure. So I know, Leslie, that you covered several of the open resources, but we definitely have a few questions in the Q&A about particular ones. In particular, we have several that are about if there are any that are in Spanish, or if there are any that support dual language programs.
I believe we do have that on the website. I don't have them evidently off the top of my head, but if you do visit the website, you should be able to scroll through. It's pretty user friendly, and you should be able to filter by content area and grade level, if that helps.
Okay, great. And we also have a question about recommendations for social studies K-5 since the new products aren't released yet.
So I'm actually not 100% sure on that. And so I can follow up if you want to shoot me an email, and I can find that information for you.
Okay, we will make sure that our attendees have links to the resources that you're describing, and that we get a follow-up on the social studies curriculum instructional materials question as well.
Okay, that's great. Are there any other questions?
We have some time if there are any other questions about high quality materials.
And I also want to preface, similar to Scarlett, this was also a very scripted presentation, just because we're also presenting those next week as well. So thanks for bearing with me.
Yes, and I'll just go ahead and support you in saying that, you know, we first included high quality instructional materials in the application last year. We had a lot of questions about it. We had some responses from applicants, and we're really trying to refine the supports that we provide our applicants. And so this team will actually be presenting at an optional support seminar as well. So if there are more specifics that you are curious about, we encourage that you attend that session. We have another question. Unsure if you mentioned it, but do you have a list of materials or recommended companies? I'm sorry, you're on mute.
Sorry, just looking at this question. So on the website, we do publish, we do have a list of approved, sorry, I'm trying to think of the word that we were using for this. It's the commissioner's list of approved products that come out. We do have one coming out in November for phonics, I believe. And so I believe you can find those on our website as well. So it'll give you the list of those materials. And as for companies, I'm not entirely sure, but I can also answer that email question in an email.
Okay, great. We also have a question about discipline management materials. Is there any behavior instructional materials?
That's one I'm not entirely sure about. So again, another question that I'll have to circle up on.
And where can we find a link to the, is that open educational materials resource?
Yeah, I'll drop that link here in the chat. Just give me a second.
Sure.
So here is a link to the TRR website.
Great. I will.
And just to circle back to that question about list of materials, if you go to about TRR, on the fourth tab, there's the commissioner's list of recommended phonics programs. So anybody who's interested in that can check that out.
We do also have the TRR linked in one of the resource pages, the resource page that corresponds with HQIM in the Generation 28 application. So again, we will make sure that you have these links and these resources, but many of them you can find embedded within the application itself. It was our intention to be as helpful as we possibly could in that regard. Okay, any other questions? All right, we will make sure to follow up for the FAQ for things that we were not able to address live. Thank you so much, Leslie, for your time and your presentation.
Awesome. Thank you all.
All right. We are going to turn it back over to our fearless leader, Marion Shetty.
Hi, everybody. We know that you have been sitting for a while with us today, getting lots of good information about the application process. And a number of questions have come up around the Texas Charter School Incubator. And so I wanted to make sure that you had the opportunity to do that. We have launched 4 new kind of strands of the incubator in the past year. And so really, I think we've thrown a lot of information at you today. And you might be asking yourself, are we ready to actually write our application and submit it and follow through? And if you are, that's great. We look forward to seeing an application from you in Generation 28. And want to say, I believe we should have either this week or next week, 2 of our new charter incubation for school leader folks going through the process as well. So they should be participating here or next week on the call as they work on their Generation 28 application. But we are really launching the incubator and replicator to provide additional supports to folks who are interested in starting charter schools. And so maybe if there's been too much information today, or you're not sure that you have your model kind of squared away yet, there are avenues to potentially participate in the incubator. And so of those 4 new programs, 3 are related to new charter school incubation. So you'll see there at the top, replication and expansion. That's for our charters that we already have here in the state of Texas who want to replicate and grow. And then we have 2 kind of new charter open enrollment streams. One is for school leaders. So folks who have already had experience running schools who may not need a full kind of 2-year in-depth process. And so for that kind of our new charter incubator for school leaders program works with existing school leaders and leadership teams who are interested in opening a new charter school. At this point, we're looking for candidates who would be interested in applying in Generation 28, so the next cycle. And those would be for schools that would open up in school year 25, 26, believe it or not. So we've already have our candidates who are in the cycle who are working on their Generation 28 applications right now. Then we also have another program in the incubator. Maybe you don't have as much experience running a charter school. Maybe you're a community leader or a teacher. Those with limited school leadership experience. We have a 2-year program in the incubator. And so you'd be working towards a Generation 30 application submission in late 2024 for schools that would open up school year 26, 27. And that really gives lots of in-depth time to not only design your school and model, but also build your leadership expertise and do a residency within a charter school as well. And then our last one there at the bottom is we have an in-district charter incubator replicator kind of expansion program. And those are for organizations that want to operate a district charter. So you would not apply to TEA's application process, you would apply to potentially a call for quality schools that a traditional ISD would put forth. And so that's another avenue and opportunity to start a school and one of the 4 arms of the incubator. So what is the incubator and what are the specifics of the program look like? So kind of the nitty gritty of each of the programs varies, but leaders will receive significant support no matter what. So the incubator programming comes with 5 months of an intensive cohort experience, 5+ months, excuse me. Receive a year of an additional coaching in that first year of launch to make sure that school launch remains strong. For those with prior school leadership experience, you have access to leadership development programs and tailored support and topics that are most relevant to you. And then those with limited school leadership experience, kind of that 2-year program and runway, school visits and resident experiences at excellent schools are part of that, as well as extra support and topics that are most relevant to you. And I think the exciting thing about this is that a stipend comes with this work to support the deep engagement of the work. So essentially, if you apply and are accepted into the incubator, this becomes your job, right? And so the stipend is there to mimic a salary that you would receive. So you're not trying to work full-time and plan a charter school at the same time. So really excited about this opportunity. And it's a real investment. And because of that investment, we have a pretty rigorous application process even for the incubator. So you have to submit an interest application, which comes with a video as well. Then site visits into schools where you currently work and or lead, and then in-person interviews as well. And so it's a pretty robust and rigorous process. We are in the process of launching our next cycle. John, if you want to click really quick. And if you're interested, we have an email address set up. So if you, and I want to be really clear, if you're not interested in applying for Generation 28, the incubator is an option for you. If you are applying in Generation 28, except for our 2 folks who are already in the incubator is not a pathway for you. But if you're interested, you can email charterincubator@tea.texas.gov, and we'll give you some additional information, talk to you about the application process and the next timeline for that. So we're really excited about this opportunity to get folks more support before they get to the mandatory info sessions, essentially, in future cycles and future rounds. So thanks, everybody. We know everybody was sitting on your edge of your seat for that additional information about the incubator. And thanks for hanging with us today. We know that there's a lot of information. The good thing is we've recorded today. We're going to put out the FAQ, and then you can always reach out to John and Natalie when you have questions as well, too. We'll be on the line here for those of you who have additional questions that maybe you didn't ask or answer. But if you'd like to leave at this point, you're able to do that. I'll tee off to John or Natalie to see if you have any last things to say before folks depart.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, to reiterate that I know I've been doing lots of shameless plugs, but there's a reason for it. They are based on data. We know that the special education presentation is a lot of information. We know that HQIM is a lot of information. So we have deliberately programmed these optional support seminars to follow up and expand more deeply on the presentations that you have seen today. So there is a support seminar scheduled with Scarlett and her team, and there is a support seminar scheduled with Leslie and her team. So if your head is spinning from the amount of information that you received, please, please, please go to the additional supports webpage and sign up for those webinars. They're there to help. And again, John and I will be doing one closer to application submission time to just go through the steps and best practices for application submission as well. We know that this is a lot, so we're here to reiterate things and answer questions as best as we can.
I just wanted to thank you all for coming. I don't think we talk about it enough, but it takes a lot of courage to even come this far. I always appreciate and respect you all's intentions and motivations for coming to these things and wanting to start a charter school. So I just wanted to say thank you for that, and showing up today and sitting through a very long day. So thank you. Yeah, so we'll kick off the Q&A now. Let's see. Sorry, I'm just sifting through them. Everyone's super happy, Marion, about this incubator. That's most of the comments. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions necessarily. Let me see. Other than incubator questions.
I just want to be really clear about the incubator. Again, so the incubator is folks who want to apply for Generation 29 at this point. There's a question on that the incubator require that a person leave a job. So it is expected that your full-time and energy would be spent on the incubator. And so the stipend is there to replace and act as a salary in order to do so. I'll also just add about the incubator. We have a limited pool of funding for it. I know that there's a lot of interest in the chat. It is a really competitive process. This year we had over 20 applications and we admitted 2 folks in. So if the incubator is something that you're interested in, just want to let you know that that it is a deeply competitive process, but also that shouldn't stop you from continuing to prepare for your application and your process right now. There's many things that you can do with the resources that were shared today to be thinking about the design and model of your school as well too. You also don't have to apply for or be a part of the incubator to apply for a charter school. It is a specific special program that we have set out in order to kind of bolster the pipeline of strong, high quality charter schools here in the state of Texas, but it's not a requirement to submit a Generation 28 or 29 application.
I had a question about certificate of attendance. No, so we no longer require or provide a certificate of attendance because we're in this new and exciting Zoom world. We can verify your attendance through the Zoom. So no need. All you need to do is complete your application. Natalie, do you see that second question? There it is.
Yes, so I would say as far as supports for design and model, definitely download the Generation 28 application and go ahead and look through the resource pages, including the evaluation criteria. We know that the school design is a tremendous bulk of the charter proposal, and so we have included as many resources as we possibly can. Additionally, again, to reiterate the support seminars, there are a lot of agency initiatives that really are coming to the forefront in terms of supports and innovative options and program design that TEA simply offers. So what we have done is we have linked a lot of those programs in those resource pages as mentioned, but we will also be having a support seminar about them as well. So I would consider registering for that in addition to the resources already provided. So those are all with the intention of helping you guide your educational model in alignment with your mission and vision.
So we have a question, and this person's asking, can you start your public meetings now if you don't apply in 28, but you want to wait till 29? Typically, we have an 18-month window. So you can count any public meeting you do towards that application cycle if it's within 18 months of the application cycle. So in this particular case, you have to do the math, but depending on when you do your public meeting, it could be applicable to 1029.
So there's a question here around if you get selected for the incubator, can you still submit the application for, it says chapter 28 or 29. I think you mean Generation 28 or 29, while continuing to be a candidate for the program. I hope that makes sense. So there is, I mean, you could go forward and submit your organization's plan for Generation 28. Really, the incubator is to design that plan and model though. And so the idea would be that we would work with folks who haven't designed that yet, because the bulk of the program is to go through the planning and design of the school and the application that you would complete. So you'd kind of be a little ahead of the game at that point.
Let's see, the question is for the 18-month window that I mentioned, is it 18 months from the submission date? It's 18 months prior to the application launch date. So it would be 8. So for 28, you can use a public meeting that is within the 18-month window of July 15th. As of July 15th is when the application was launched.
So there's a question here related to the incubator program if you're working as a team. So we will have openings and information sessions about the incubator and how that works in the next application cycle. If you're interested to be contacted about those cycles, please email charterincubator@tea.texas.gov. Another question related to the incubator: are only 2 applicants chosen for each incubator program? No, we only selected 2 candidates because they met the quality bar this year. So we're really selective of who goes into the process. We have funding that varies for a number of candidates each year.
So I was going to remind everyone, since we still have about 57 people in the room, Marion threw a lot of CSP information at you. I just want to remind you that those office hours are a really good time and opportunity to present some of those questions. I think that's one of the biggest topics that was discussed last year in those office hours with CSP and allowable and non-allowable.
It looks like our questions have slowed down to 0. So if you're waiting to hear the answers to everyone else's questions, feel free, you guys can feel free to go at this point. We appreciate you all spending your Friday with us. We know we try to make it as painless as possible. We know, but it's fun to get a bunch of information thrown at you. You're free to join us next Friday if you want. Again, you don't have to. This counts as your attendance at your mandatory info session. If your board member and your staff member were also here today. So we will see you next week if you're an overachiever and want to come. There's no extra bonus points if you come to both. But otherwise, we will post the recording next week after next week's session, and we'll have a really robust FAQ, so you'll be able to get any other answers that you need. You won't receive a certificate for this session. Due to the Zoom registration, we're able to see everyone who has attended.
right, y'all, I think we're gonna go ahead and call a 30-second last call. There's 26 of you all left in here, so we're gonna do 30 seconds. All right, well, that's time. We're going to go ahead and end the session today. Thank you all so much for coming. And we will see you either next week, or we will see you when we see you in one of our information sessions or our office hours. All right, y'all, have a good one now.
Thank you.
Bye.